There we go. Alright, so let's start that over again, because apparently my microphone was slightly unplugged. There we go. So yeah, as I was saying and you couldn't hear me, no worries. So we're going to continue our reading of The Paradise Snare. It's a Star Wars book by A.C. Crispin. I was lurking, no worries. So last week we kind of ended off at the beginning of Chapter 3. Chapter 3 is called Crash Landing, so we'll pick up there. And then we are also drinking some coffee tonight, which you can see right there. Is Equal Exchange Mind, Body, and Soul blend. It's a coffee that I used to drink when I was in high school. This little coffee shop called Jitterbug. Turn the music down a little bit. This little coffee shop called Jitterbug used Equal Exchange coffee pretty much exclusively. Hey, Star Wars. So yeah, that's the coffee that's in here, and it's a cafe au lait, which is basically half, usually pretty strong coffee, and then half steamed and foam milk. Recap the story before we start the book? Yeah, we'll do a quick recap too. So yeah, tonight I did, it's mostly the Mind, Body, and Soul. Oh, yeah, it won't keep me up. Coffee never does. Like, it'll help me stay alert, but I never have trouble sleeping after coffee. But for this one, I did mostly this coffee that you see on the screen, but I added in just a little bit of chicory as well. Yeah. So I added in a little bit of chicory as well, which is a bit of Louisiana, New Orleans kind of thing. It's pretty popular to have a cafe au lait there with coffee and chicory. And then yeah, I just did steamed and foamed milk on my espresso machine. I just steamed that up real quick, and it's probably about 3/4 steamed milk and 1/4 foam milk. And yeah, it's pretty tasty. And yeah, if you want to pick up any of that coffee, just do a Google search for Equal Exchange coffee. That's the logo right there on the screen. They've got a few different blends that are pretty good. And if you want to pick up the book, that's a picture of the cover right there. I bought mine at a used bookstore, but I'm sure you could probably get it at Barnes & Noble or Amazon. I'm learning all I've never learned of coffee. I am a walking encyclopedia of useless coffee trivia. I've been obsessed with coffee since I was like 15. But yeah, it's part of a trilogy. I highly recommend picking up all three. It's a really good story. Way better origin story than the Solo movie. So if you thought Solo was good, this story will absolutely blow your mind. Because it's a billion times better. I would love talking with you about that. He loves coffee. Oh yeah, that'd be cool. Yeah, I could talk coffee all day. Saw Solo movie. I kind of hated it, but it's because I've read these books, so I kind of already knew what it could have been or should have been. But I think if Solo, the movie, had been about anybody but Han Solo, so like just throw in a random new character and make it not the Millennium Falcon, I think it could have been a good Star Wars movie. But for me, it did not say Han Solo at all. Like, he starts out as a naive, optimistic kid, and he ends as a naive, optimistic kid. So it doesn't really tell us how he goes from that to what we see in A New Hope. So yeah, that whole thing bugged me quite a bit. Which is one of the reasons we're reading this today. Oh man, that's good coffee. So let's see. A quick recap of chapters 1 and 2. We found out that, we kind of caught up with Han Solo as a young teenager. We learned a lot about his childhood. We learned that he got taken in by, what was his name? Captain Shrike. This sort of cruel freighter captain that kind of collected street urchins and people like that, little kids, to do begging and thieving and things like that for him. Very cruel guy. That's Cruel, not cool, but cruel. And he kind of got adopted on that ship by a Wookiee called Dulana, who took care of him. This is Han. We find out that Han is most likely related to a prominent family on Corellia, the Sal Solos. We found out a little bit about them. And the best bet is that his parents were either killed or he was separated from them somehow. That's how he ended up as a street urchin, basically. So he's had a pretty crappy life for the most part. Some traumatic memories, like he can't remember his parents because the memory is too painful. But he did some searching on his own. So there's a lot of recap there, and then when we left words are hard. When we left off, he had stowed away aboard a robot ship, a droid ship, in a spacesuit, and was on his way to a planet with these it's like a monastery type place, and they're looking for a pilot. So he stowed away on a droid ship that was heading there, and he's just about to run out of air. He had to basically take the autopilot offline, and he had to kind of do a logic loop argument with an R2 unit in the ship to get the R2 unit to give him control. And yeah, so they've arrived at the planet, but they haven't landed, and he's barely got any air left, and he has to try to land the thing using basically diagnostic controls, not actual pilot controls. And I think that's about caught everything up. So, we'll jump into Chapter 3. And feel free to chime in with any questions or anything like that. I'll be glancing up to look at chat as I'm reading. Yeah, no problem. So Chapter 3, Crash Landing. Turn the music down just a touch more. What is popping up? Go away, virus scan. There we go. Alright. Chapter 3, Crash Landing. Is Solo like in the movies? Is Han in this book like the Han Solo in the original trilogy, you mean? Yeah. He's definitely a younger version, and so he still is a little more optimistic and a little less jaded than the A New Hope character. But he's already been through some crap, so he's very much so recognizable as Han Solo. Yeah. Alright, so Chapter 3, Crash Landing. Although he'd flown hundreds of hours in swoops and speeders, Han's experience with piloting larger vessels was confined to the times Garrus Shrike had permitted him to pilot the Lux shuttle on easy runs. Garrus Shrike is the name of the captain that took him in, and I believe it's called the Trader's Luck was the name of the freighter that he grew up on. He'd taken off and landed, but he'd never before tried to land anything as large as the robot freighter. Han hoped he'd be able to handle it. He had confidence in his ability as a pilot, After all, hadn't he been the junior speeder champion of all Corellia 3 years running? And last year, hadn't he won the Swoop Racing Championship of the entire Corellian system? Still, compared to the Lux Shuttle, this freighter was huge. Han dozed again, then when he awoke, roved restlessly around the cabin, knowing he should be conserving his energy in his air, but unable to stop himself. Sir, the R2 unit that had been so quiet for so many hours suddenly came back to life. I must advise you that we have reached the orbit of Alesia. You must stand ready to make your descent and landing. Thanks for telling me, Han said. Going over to the control banks, he scanned the instruments, mentally calculating their descent. This wasn't going to be easy. He had no way to interface with the Navicomputer except via the R2 unit. A pilot had to make split-second decisions at times, and in cases like that, Han wouldn't be able to wait for the R2 unit to comply. The ship suddenly shivered, then rocked slightly. They were hitting atmosphere, Han realized. He took a deep breath and glanced at his air pack reading, realizing it was going to be close. Very, very close. Here we go, he thought, switching to manual control of the Alessian Dream. Hey, R2, he said tightly, adjusting his course slightly. Yes, sir. Wish me luck. I beg your pardon, sir. This unit is not... Han swore, and the Alessian Dream headed down for the surface of a planet he couldn't even see. He could see the sensor readouts and the infrared scanners, though, and he realized that Alesia was a world of tempestuous air currents, even in the upper layers of the atmosphere. Mapping sensors created a global portrait of the planet, shallow seas studded with islands, and 3 small continents. One lay nearly at the North Pole, but the other 2, the eastern and western continents, lay nearer the equator, in what must be temperate zones. Great, he muttered to himself, locating the ship's home and beacon. He could use it as a guide to plan his landing. The landing field was on the eastern continent. That must be where the Alessian colony of priests and religious pilgrims were located. The Dream rocked wildly, swooping through the swirling air currents like a child on a rope swing. Han's suit gloves were clumsy on the undersized diagnostic controls, as he used his stabilizers to steady their descent. Trying to get the feel of the controls, Han yawed them to port, then overcompensated, sending them skittering to starboard. On the infrared image, a huge blob of red suddenly loomed up. That's a huge storm, Han thought, using his laterals to even out their descent. He allowed the Dream to drift a few degrees north, figuring that he'd miss the storm, then swing back south later, when he was beneath the maelstrom. The ionized particles left in the wake of all that lightning were playing havoc with his instruments, Han realized. He gulped air, felt his chest tighten, and had to fight back panic. Good pilots couldn't afford to let their emotions get in the way, or they'd wind up dead, and that would end their trip real quick, wouldn't it? R2, Han said tightly. See if you can chart me those storm areas so I can avoid the ion trails that lightning is leaving. Concentrate on the direct flight path between our present location and the landing field on the eastern continent. Yes, sir, the R2 unit said. Moments later, the electrical storm sights appeared before him. Give me a scaled-down version of that chart in the corner of this screen, R2, Han ordered. Usually it would be the Navicomputer's job to merge the intended flight path with the geographical features and the storm cells and to suggest an intended course, which the pilot could then implement and modify as needed. Han had never missed having a Navicomputer at his disposal more than he did at this moment. He slowed their headlong rush fractionally, then was forced to kick in their thrusters to get them out of the way of yet another wind shear from a storm cell. Sweat was dripping down his face now as he fought the tiny controls, forcing the Alessian Dream into maneuvers only a swoop or military fighter could reasonably be expected to tackle. Han realized he was still gasping and Pardon me for a moment. My cat has gotten into something. 1 second. Here's the troublemaker. This is Jane. Say hi. He thought it would be a great idea to get up on the kitchen counter, where he knows he's not supposed to be, and knock over all my containers. He's named Jane after the Firefly character for a reason. Alright. So let's see. Han had never missed having a Nava computer at his disposal more than he did at this moment. He slowed their headlong rush fractionally, then was forced to kick in their thrusters to get them out of the way of yet another wind shear from a storm cell. Sweat was dripping down his face now as he fought the tiny controls, forcing the Alessian Dream into maneuvers only a swoop or a military fighter could reasonably be expected to tackle. Han realized he was still gasping and wondered for a split second whether it was from stress and adrenaline or whether his air was running out. He couldn't spare the second it would take to check the air pack. They were now only a kilometer above the surface of the planet, coming in with a rush. Too fast. Han slowed them, using the braking thrusters roughly. G-forces seized him, and he felt as though something were squeezing his chest in a giant vice. He was gasping steadily now, and he dared to look down at his air pack. Empty. The status indicator was solidly in the red zone. Hold together. Hold together, Han, he counseled himself. Just keep breathing. There's got to be enough air in your suit to support you for a couple of minutes at least. He shook his head, feeling lightheaded and dizzy. His breath began to burn in his chest, but they were almost slow enough now to land. He braked again, lightly, and the ship bucked suddenly. I've lost my forward stabilizer. Han fought to compensate, still too fast, but there was nothing more he could do about that. He flicked on the repulsor lifts and began to set her down, feeling the ship's vibration through his knees and legs as he knelt on the deck. Hold together, baby, he thought at the Dream. Hold together with a huge whoomp. The forward port side repulsor shorted out. The Dream yawed wildly to port, hit the ground, then bounced upward. The starboard repulsor blew, and then its entire starboard side impacted with the ground, nearly flipping the vessel over. Wham! With a hideous crunch that Han could feel through his entire body, the Alessian Dream crashed into the surface of the planet, shuddered once, and was still. Han was thrown violently across the cabin. His helmet impacted with the bulkhead, and he lay there, arms and legs flung wide, dazed. He fought to stay conscious. If he passed out, he'd never wake up again. Trying to pull himself up into a sitting position, Han grunted with effort. Waves of blackness threatened. He triggered his suit's communication channel. R2. R2, come in. Those emotes are cute. Yes, sir. I am here, sir. The droid's mechanical tone sounded a bit shaken. If you don't mind my saying so, sir, that appears to have been a most unconventional landing. I am concerned that... Shut up and open the cargo airlock, Han wheezed. He managed to push himself up into a... R2. He managed to push himself up into a sitting position, but he was afraid he wouldn't be able to stay up. He was swaying like a drunk in a high wind. But, sir, I warned you that in the interest of security, all entrances would be sealed pending... Han found the blaster he'd stuck into the outside pocket of his suit, and, drawing it, leveled the weapon at R2. R2, you open that airlock now, or I'll blast your metal hide into atoms. The droid's lights flashed frantically. Han's finger tightened on the trigger as he wondered whether he'd have the strength to crawl to the airlock. Blackness hovered at the edges of his vision. Yes, sir, the R2 said. I'm doing as you request. Moments later, Han felt the concussion as air whooped into the Dream with near-explosive force. Gasping, he counted to 20, then, with the last of his remaining strength, wrenched off his helmet. He let himself sink back down onto the deck. He gasped, found he could breathe, and gulped huge lungfuls of fresh air. Warm air, humid air laden with smells he couldn't identify. But it was rich with oxygen, eminently breathable, and that was all he cared about at the moment. Closing his eyes, Han concentrated on simply breathing and felt exhaustion overwhelm him. His head throbbed, and he needed just a moment to rest. Just a moment. When Han swam back up to full consciousness and opened his eyes, he found he was staring into a face out of a nightmare. That is the ugliest critter I've ever seen, was his first thought. Only years of experience in dealing with non-humans of all varieties made him able to control his initial reaction. The face was broad, with two bulbous, protruding eyes, and covered with leathery, grayish-tan skin. No visible ears, and only slits for nostrils. Above the nostril slits was a large, blunt horn that was nearly as long as Han's forearm. The mouth was a wide, lipless split in the huge head. Han shook his own pounding head and managed to sit up, noting from his surroundings that he appeared to be in some type of infirmary. A medical droid hovered across the room, lights flashing. His host, if that was who the creature was big, Han realized. Much bigger than even a Wookiee. It somewhat resembled a Barite in that it walked on 4 tree trunk-like legs, but it was far larger. This creature's head was appended to a short, humped neck that was attached to a massive body. Han figured its back would reach his shoulders when he was standing up. The leathery skin covering its body hung in creases, wrinkles, and loose folds, especially on its short, almost non-existent neck. The skin shone with an oily gleam. The 4 short legs ended in huge padded feet. A long, whippy tail was curled over its back. For a moment, Han wondered if the creature had any manipulatory limbs, but then he noticed 2 undersized arms that were folded against its chest, half hidden by the loose folds of neck skin. The being's hands were delicate, almost feminine, with 4 long, supple fingers on each hand. The being opened its mouth and spoke in accented but understandable Basic. "Greetings, Mr. Drago. Allow me to welcome you to Alesia. Are you a pilgrim?" "But I'm not," Han muttered, his head spinning. For a moment the name didn't connect, then things snapped into place. Of course, he clamped his mouth shut, thinking that maybe he'd gotten a worse knock on the head than he'd realized. Vic Drago was the alias whose ID he'd currently been carrying. Han had several alter egos with proper documentation to back them up. Ironically, he had nothing by way of ID under his true name. "Sorry," he muttered, holding his hand to his head, hoping his slip would be excused as a result of his head injury. "I'm still kind of shaken up, I guess. No, I'm not a pilgrim. I came here to answer a job advertisement for someone. Preferably a Corellian to do the piloting here." "I see. But how did you happen to be aboard our ship when it crashed?" the creature inquired. "I wanted to reach Alesia as quickly as possible, so I took the opportunity to stow away on the Alessian Dream," Han said. "I'd have had to wait a week for a commercial flight, and the ad said a pilot was urgently needed. Did you get my message?" Yes, we did," the being said. Han watched it intently, wishing he could read its expression. "We were expecting you, but not in the Elysian Dream." "See, I brought the ad with me." Han reached for his jumpsuit that was hanging over a chair beside the bed and extracted the holocube that featured the Elysian advertisement he'd replied to. "It says you need someone to start right away." He handed the cube over. "So, Vic Drago here, and I'm applying for this job. I'm Corellian, and I fit all your qualifications. I wanted to say that I'm sorry about crashing the Dream. Your ship's a different model than any I ever piloted, but a couple hours on a simulator will fix that. And I'm afraid that your atmospheric currents came as a surprise." The being scanned the cube, then placed it on the table. The corners of the massive, lipless mouth turned upward slightly. "I see, Mr. Drago. I am the most exalted High Priest of Alesia, Teruinza. Welcome to our colony. I'm impressed at your initiative, young human. Traveling aboard a robot ship in order to answer our ad so quickly speaks well for you." Han frowned, wishing his head didn't hurt quite so much. "Well, thanks. I'm impressed that you managed to control and land a robot craft. Few human pilots would have been able to react quickly enough to deal with the world's challenging weather patterns. The damage to our ship is not serious, and repairs are already underway. You landed on soft ground, which was fortunate. Does that mean I got the job? Han asked eagerly. Great, they're not mad. Would you be willing to sign a year's contract? Taro Enza asked. Maybe, Han said, leaning back and relaxing, hands behind his head. How much? The high priest named a sum that made Han smile inwardly. Even though it was more money than he'd hoped for, he was too much of a traitor not to automatically bargain. Well, I don't know, he said, rubbing his chin thoughtfully. I made more than that in my previous position. A lie, but not one they'd be able to disprove. Vic Drago had indeed made more than that. Han had paid well to make sure his alter ego's job record showed that he could command the highest wages. It had taken all of Han's savings, plus the proceeds from two dangerous heists that Garrus Shrike hadn't known anything about, to finance those alterations in his alter ego's job record. But Han wanted Vic Drago to be able to command a high salary. Taro Enza pondered that information, then said, very well. I can offer you 30,000 for the year, with a bonus of 10 at the end of the first 6 months, providing you make every assigned flight on schedule. Bonus of 15, Han said automatically, and you provide the training sims. 12, countered Taro Enza, and you pay for the sims. 13, Han said, you supply the sims. 12.5, and we provide the sims, the high priest said. Final offer. Okay, Han said, you got yourself a pilot. Excellent, Taro Enza actually chuckled, a deep, booming, oddly melodious sound. Quickly, the contracts were produced. Hello, bargaining, of course, right? It's Han. Of course he's going to try to get as much as he can out of them. Quickly, the contracts were produced. And Han signed them, then allowed a retinal scan as proof of his identity. Hope they're like everyone else, he thought, and just do a general system-wide check of my retinal patterns. If the priest ordered a comprehensive and very expensive all-system search to determine whether Vic Drago's retinal scan was unique, they'd eventually discover that it wasn't. Vic Drago, Genos Idanian, Talus Brine, Janel Andrus, and Keel Datana all shared the exact same retinal patterns, which wasn't surprising, as all of those individuals were in fact Han Solo. Before Han left Trader's Luck, he'd taken the precaution of stashing a small hoard of credits and complete ID sets in 2 lockboxes on Corellia, in case he ever needed a quick change of identity. Garrus Shrike had provided the boy with different sets of ID for each scam that Han participated in, and Han had kept each set and updated them as necessary. The Corellian knew, however, that none of his forged IDs would stand up to Imperial scanners. Before he'd be able to take the Academy entrance exams, Han was well aware that he'd have to pay out a small fortune in bribes on Coruscant to gain ID documentation so genuine that it would pass an Imperial security clearance check. With all the business details taken care of, Taro Enza then summoned an underpriest, or Sacerdot, as they were called, and instructed him to take Han on a tour of the complex. Han was left in private to resume his... sorry, I got something in my eye. Left in private to resume his jumpsuit after being assured that clothing bearing the Alessian symbol, a huge, wide-open eye and mouth, would be furnished to him. As he donned the clothes and his boots, he realized that he was sweating heavily. Hot and humid, he thought. Wonderful climate. But for the money the priests were paying, he was willing to put up with a year's discomfort. By taking this job, he'd get lots of practice flying big ships and access to training sims. That ought to ensure that he could pass the entrance exams to enter the academy. The money would mean that he had the proper amount for bribes to make sure his application was processed quickly and actually reached the admissions officers. He knew from his research that without bribes, it frequently took a month or more for a cadet candidate to apply, pass all relevant exams, be interviewed, and finally accepted for entrance into the Imperial Academy. The Sacerdot arrived and introduced himself as Veratil. Han followed him down a corridor, past a large amphitheater, and what appeared to be a registration area. Our welcome center, the priest explained. Veratil led him outside. Han stepped through the door, and even before he could draw a breath, He was immediately bathed in sweat. Steaming heat and humidity smote him in the face, almost like a physical blow. This reminds me of getting off the airplane when I fly home to the south. The air was rich with smells, heavy perfume from flowers, rotting vegetation, and another odor, one he'd smelled before, but he couldn't quite identify. Right? Han stood at the top of the short ramp that led down from the building and looked up at the sky, seeing that it was a translucent blue-gray. The sun overhead was an orangey red and looked larger than he was used to. The star must be closer to its planet than Corel was to Corellia. Han glanced at the shadow, seeing it was far past noon, and then glanced at his wrist chrono. "How long is the day here?" he asked Veritil. 10 standard hours, sir," the Sacerdot replied. No wonder the weather is so stormy, Han thought. We've got a hot, wet world with a really rapid rotation. Han looked out across the cleared area. The permacrete ended abruptly, giving way to natural ground and vegetation. Pools of water attested to recent torrential rain. Reddish mud was made an arresting contrast to lush blue-green vegetation. The flowers hanging from the vines and trees in the encroaching jungle were huge and multicolored, scarlet, deep purple, and vivid yellow. "This is Colony 1, Veritil explained. "We've also established 2 new colonies for our pilgrims. 2 years ago we founded Colony 2, and last winter we built Colony 3, which is still very small. Colony 2 lies about 150 kilometers north, and Colony 3 about 70 kilometers south of here." "How long has Colony 1 been here?" Han asked. Nearly 5 standard years." Han looked out across Colony 1. Directly across from the Welcome Center lay the landing pad. A little freighter lay there, listing on her repulsors. That must be the Dream, Han thought, realizing he'd never seen the ship from the outside. The Alessian Dream was a small vessel, shaped like a fat, somewhat irregular teardrop. On her underside was a bulge where there was a gun well, proving that the ship hadn't always been a robot freighter. Another, larger bulge denoted the location of the primary cargo hold. She was a graceful ship, small enough to be agile, Corellian-built, almost certainly. Han could see massive shipdock droids working on the Dream, beginning to repair her repulsors. The ship, droids, and everything nearby was splashed with reddish mud from the crash landing. Off to the northeast, high above even the jungle giant trees, Han could make out a glimpse of snow-capped heights. He pointed. "What mountains are those?" "The Mountains of the Exalted," Veritil told him. "The altar of promise where the faithful gather each night to be exalted lies before them. You shall see it tonight when you attend devotions." Oh, great, Han thought. Do I have to attend services too? Then he remembered how much the Alessians were paying him. Han nodded. "I'll bet it's something to see." To the pilot's left, he could make out a large expanse of the reddish mud. Several beings of Teroinza's and Veritil's race lolled in the mud holes, tended by droids and servants of assorted species. Han recognized a couple of Rhodians, several Gamorreans, and at least one human. "Those are the mud flats," Veritil said, waving a dainty hand at the mud bathers and their attendants. "My people relish our mud baths." "What are your people?" Han asked. "Are you native to Alessia?" "No, we are native, or as native as our distant cousins, the Hutts, to Nal Hutta," Veritil replied. "We are the Tlandatil." Han resolved to learn the Tlandatil's language as soon as he could. Knowing a language that people didn't know you knew could often prove an asset. Yeah, they're from Nal Hutta, same as the Hutts. Mm-hmm. The Sacerdot led Han around to the rear of the Welcome Center. Han's eyes widened as he took in the huge cleared area before him. Clearing that much jungle must have been quite a chore. The cleared area was roughly rectangular and at least a kilometer on each side. The mountains were now behind and to his left, and he could see on his extreme right the blue-gray glitter of water. "Lake?" he asked, indicating it. No, that is Zoma Gawanga, the Western Ocean," Veritil informed him. Han counted the huge buildings that lay before the mud flats. There were 9 of them. 5 were 3 stories high, the other 4 were only 1 story. Each was easily the size of a Corellian city block. "Homes for the pilgrims?" he asked, waving at the buildings. No, the dormitory for our pilgrims is over there, Veritil said. The priest waved at a massive two-story building on the far left. The multi-story buildings... Oh, pardon me. The multi-story buildings are where we process Ril, Andrus, and Carcinum. The single-story buildings you see extend far underground, a necessity for processing Glitterstem, which must be handled in complete darkness. Andrus, Ril, Carcinum, and Glitterstem. Han's nostrils flared. Of course, that explains the odor. These are factories for processing spice. He remembered that the Elysian Dream had originally carried a cargo of high-grade Glitterstem, the most expensive and exotic variety of spice. The other types were usually cheaper, though they were still one of the most profitable cargoes a smuggler could take on. We receive shipments of raw materials from worlds such as Kessel, Ryloth, and now Hutta several times a month, Veritil went on. In the beginning, the robot freighters which supplied us landed here at Colony 1, but that practice soon had to be discontinued. Why? Han asked, wondering if he really wanted to know. Two ships, most unfortunately, could not negotiate our tricky atmosphere and crashed. So we built a space station and decided to use living pilots to ferry the raw spice material down to the factories. We used to have 3 pilots, but now we are down to 1, and the unfortunate Celestin, who is currently serving as our pilot, has been ill. That is why we need you, Pilot Drago. It's so nice to be needed, Han thought sarcastically. Veritil, what happened to those other guys? One crashed, the others simply disappeared. We've also lost a number of robot vessels, which has cut down on our profit margin most grievously, Veritil said, sadly. Spice is a high credit export, but spaceships are very expensive. Yeah, Han agreed sourly. All those crashes would tend to put a crimp in your business. No wonder they didn't have pilots beating down their doors, he thought. Most of the experienced pilots have probably spread the word about how dangerous this planet is for pilots. Han knew a little bit about the various kinds of spice, mostly from hearing Shrike and the other smugglers discuss their properties. Glitterstem, mined on Kessel, was by far the most valuable. When exposed to light, then quickly ingested, it gave the user a temporary telepathic ability to sense their surface thoughts and emotions. Spies used it, lovers used it, and the Empire used it when interrogating prisoners. Matter of fact, the Empire claimed all the Glitterstem mined on Kessel as its rightful property, which is why it was so rare and so lucrative to smuggle. Ril came from the Twi'lek world, Ryloth, where it was perfectly legal to mine and was used for analgesic purposes. There were illegal applications, however, and it could be used to produce several intoxicants and hallucinogens. Carcinum was a black spice that came from Zavarkos, and it was quite rare and very valuable. Users experienced euphoria and an increase in their abilities while under the influence. They became stronger, faster, and more intelligent. There was a downside, of course. After the effects wore off, users frequently became listless, depressed, and some even died when the substance had a toxic effect on their metabolisms. Zavarkos also supplied the galaxy with Andrus, a white powder that was added to foods to enhance flavor and preserve them. Some users claimed that the drug caused a mild euphoria and increase in sensation. They're not mining it here, Han thought. These factories process the raw material to turn into the finished product. Factories? Han echoed. They're huge. Yes, and Elysia has admirable production rates, enabling us to favorably compete with the cost of spice shipped directly from Kessel, Ryloth, or Zavarkos, Veritil explained. Nice joke, but yeah. And we are the only facility that offers such varieties of spice. Buyers frequently wish to purchase several different kinds of spice for their customers, and we provide that. Han saw figures entering and leaving the factory buildings. Many humans, some non-humans. He recognized Twi'leks, Rhodians, Gamorreans, Devorians, Celestins, and there were other that were unknown to him. All the humans and bipedal aliens wore tan-colored robes that came down below their knees and tan-colored caps that covered their hair. He gestured at the people. Factory workers? The Sacerdot hesitated, then said, They are the pilgrims that have chosen to serve the oneness, the all, in our factories. Oh, Han murmured, I see. He saw a lot of things now, more and more clearly each instance, and he had a bad feeling about what he was seeing. These pilgrims come here to attain religious sanctuary. and wind up working in spice factories. I smell a Vrelt, a dead one. The Alessian sun was far down in the sky by now, almost to the horizon. Han noticed the throngs of tan-clad workers that were streaming northeast toward the mountains. Baratil beckoned Han with one undersized hand. "It is time for the blessed pilgrims to attend devotions and to be exalted in the One. Render their prayers to the All. Let us take the path of oneness to reach the altar of promises. Come, Pilot Drago." Han obediently followed the priest up a well-worn paved path. Pardon me. There we go. Even though they were surrounded by pilgrims, Han noticed that no one ventured very close to them. All of the pilgrims gave Baratil deep bows, hands folded over their hearts. "They offer thanks for the exaltation they are about to receive," Baratil explained to Han as they walked along. As they moved away from the buildings, the jungle around them closed in until the path they were walking on was shadowed and overhung with giant branches. Han almost felt as though he were walking in a tunnel. They passed a huge open area that was evidently some kind of swamp because it was completely covered in huge blooms that were so beautiful and exotic that Han had never seen anything like them. "The flowered plains," Baratil, still playing tour guide, pointed out. "And this is the Forest of Faithfulness." Han nodded. "I wonder how much more of this I can take," he thought. "I hope they don't expect me to become a convert because they've got the wrong guy." After a 20-minute walk, the group reached a large paved area that was fronted with a partially roofed area supported by 3 monstrous pillars. Baratil indicated that Han should stay with the crowd of pilgrims, then the Sacerdot moved on, heading for the pillars. Han saw several of the Talanda Til assembled beneath the pillars, including one that he tentatively identified as Teroenza. They were arranged around a low altar carved from some translucent white stone that seemed to glow with an inner light. The high snow-capped mountains made an impressive backdrop to the scene as they towered high above the jungle. Han craned his neck, looking up the tops of the highest peaks, which were hidden by drifting clouds stained red from the sunset. The snows on the western side of the peaks glowed crimson and rose. "Impressive," Han was forced to admit. The simplicity of the natural amphitheater, with its paved floor and pillared altar, made it seem like some vast natural cathedral. The faithful filed into ranks and stood waiting. Han stood at the back, shifting impatiently, hoping whatever religious service was about to take place wouldn't last long. He was hungry, his head was throbbing, and the heat was making him sleepy. The high priest raised his tiny arms and intoned a phrase in his native language. Excuse me. The Sacerdots, including Baratil, echoed him. Then the assembled throng, Han estimated 400 or 500 in the crowd, echoed the high priest's phrase. Han leaned closer to the nearest pilgrim, a Twi'lek. "What are they saying?" "They said, 'The One is all,'" the Twi'lek, who spoke excellent Basic, translated. "Would you like me to interpret the service for you?" Since Han was determined to begin learning the Talanda Til language, he nodded. "If you wouldn't mind." The high priest intoned again. Han listened to the ritual phrases repeated by the Sacerdots, then droned forth by the faithful pilgrims. "The All is one. We are one. We belong to the All. In service to the All, everyone is exalted. We sacrifice to achieve the All. We serve the One. In work and sacrifice we all are all fulfilled. If every one has worked hard, we are all exalted." Han stifled a yawn. This was awfully repetitious. Finally, after nearly 15 minutes of chanting, Teroenza and all the priests stepped forward. "You have worked well," the high priest pronounced. "Prepare for the blessings of exaltation." The crowd gave forth a sound of such greedy anticipation that Han was taken aback. Moving in a great wave as though they were truly one, they dropped to the pavement and lay there, arms and legs huddled beneath their bodies, in an attitude of breathless hope and yearning. All of the priests raised their arms. Han watched as the loose wrinkled skin that hung below their throats inflated with air and began to pulse. A low throbbing hum, or was it a vibration, gradually filled the air. Han's eyes widened as he felt something invade his mind and body. Part vibration, part sound, He wasn't sure. Was it empathy or telepathy? Or did that vibration trigger something in his brain? He couldn't tell. He only knew that it was strong. It rolled across him in a great wave. Emotional warmth, physical pleasure. It was all of that and more. Han staggered back off the permacrete until he was brought up short by the trunk of one of the forest giants. He braced himself against the tree, his head swimming. He dug his fingernails into the bark, hanging on to the tree. His hands against the bark seemed to be the only thing keeping him from being swept away by that wave of warm feeling and ecstatic pleasure. Han hung on to the tree physically and himself mentally, refusing to let himself be sucked under with that wave. He wasn't sure where he found the strength, but he fought as hard as he had ever had. All his life he'd been his own person, master of his own mind and body, and nothing was going to change that. He was Han Solo, and he didn't need aliens invading his mind or his body to make it feel good. No, he thought, I'm a free man, not some pilgrim, not your puppet. Free, do you hear? Gritting his teeth, Han fought that invasion as he would have fought a physical opponent, and then, as quickly as it had started, the sensation was gone. He was free. But it was obvious the pilgrims weren't. Their bodies writhed on the stone, and muffled moans of happiness and pleasure made a soft swell of sound. Sickened, Han looked over at the priests. They obviously weren't affected as the pilgrims were. So this is why those poor dupes stay. Once they find out they're expected to work in the spice factories, Han thought, feeling a surge of bitter resentment on the behalf of the pilgrims. They slave all day, then they hike up here and get a jolt of feel-good vibrations that makes even the best spice pale by comparison. Ugh. Han wondered whether he'd be expected to attend these evening devotionals every night, and hoped that he wouldn't. It had been hard enough to push away that rush of warmth and pleasure tonight. He was afraid that if he had to be exposed to it every night, he wouldn't have the strength, the resolution, to reject the Elysian priest's quote-unquote happy pill. By this time, the pilgrims were beginning to get up, some of them weaving unsteadily. All of their eyes were glazed, and many looked like addicts. Han had seen in spice and oobla dens on Corellia and other worlds. Do they do this every night? He muttered to the Twi'lek. The alien's reddish eyes were shining with joy. Oh yes, wasn't it wonderful? Great, Han said, but the Twi'lek was so enraptured he missed the sarcasm. Do they ever not hold these devotions? Han asked curiously. They are only cancelled if there has been trouble in the factories. One time a worker went mad and took a foreman hostage. Then he demanded passage off planet. Evening devotions and the exaltation were cancelled. It was horrible. So what happened to the mad worker? Han asked, reflecting that the quote-unquote madman sounded completely sane to him. Before morning we managed to overpower him and turn him over to the guards. Thank the one, the Twi'lek said. Yeah, I'll bet, Han thought. They couldn't stand being without their little nightly charge. The service was evidently over. Veritil joined Han for the walk back to the central compound. Han was disinclined to talk and truthfully pleaded fatigue. The Sacerdot, saying that he understood perfectly, showed the Corellian pilot back to the infirmary. You may eat and sleep here tonight, he said, and tomorrow we will take you to your permanent quarters in our administration building. Where's that? Han asked, pausing halfway through a bite of indifferent but filling redox stew. The Sacerdot waved his arm roughly northeast. Not visible from here, but there's a path through the trees. I'll meet you back here in, say, 6 standard hours. Will that provide you with sufficient sleep? Han nodded. He could always try to snatch a nap later. Fine. When the priest was gone, Han dragged off his clothes and boots, realizing that he had to get something clean to wear by tomorrow, or he wouldn't be fit for polite society. He considered taking a shower before bed, but he was just too tired. Han had always been able to set himself to wake up whenever he wished to, so he mentally programmed himself to wake up in 5.5 hours. Then his mind whirling with images and impressions, he lay down on his narrow infirmary bunk and was instantly asleep. It took him a few minutes the next morning to remember just who he was, Vic Drago, and don't forget it. How much coffee is left? Not a whole lot. But I have enough to make another cup, which I'll probably do in just a minute. It took him a few minutes next morning to remember who he was and what he was doing in the sticky hot place. Han ventured into the shower and was pleased to find the refresher unit contained everything necessary for a human being. He hummed tunelessly as he soaped himself, but when he lifted a foot to wash it, Han froze in surprise and dismay. Fuzzy, blue-green, mossy stuff was growing between his toes. Alarmed, Han checked further and was disgusted to find patches starting in his armpits, at the back of his neck, and other, even more personal areas. Cursing, he scrubbed the disgusting fungus away, leaving raw skin behind, and then, realizing he was running late, he bolted out of the shower. What kind of a place is this, anyway? When he walked back into the sleeping area, he found the medical droid waiting for him, with a new pilot's uniform draped over one arm. The droid held a jar of slimy gray stuff in the other hand. "Pardon me, sir," the droid said, "but may I ask whether you are experiencing any outbreaks of fungus growing on your skin?" "Yeah," Han snarled. "Climate in this place is miserable. Nobody deserves to live in this dump." "I quite understand, sir," the droid said, actually managing to sound sympathetic. "May I offer the contents of this jar? It should prevent fungal growths with regular application." "Thanks," Han said, shortly, and retired to treat the affected areas. The stuff smelled horrible, but it soothed the irritation. Then he got dressed, admiring himself in his first real pilot's uniform. The colorful patches looked quite spiffy. Han refused to let himself worry about the pilgrims he'd seen last night. Nobody had forced the weak-minded fools to come here, so he wasn't going to waste any time imagining their fate. He was going to take care of Han Solo, or more accurately, he was going to take care of Vic Drago. Besides, Han told himself, I'm going to be piloting for these Alessians. I'll have access to a ship. If I decide I don't like it, I'll just take my money and vanish. What can they do to stop me, after all? Feeling cocky, Han smiled at his reflection in the mirror and gave himself a snappy salute. "Cadet Han Solo reporting for duty, sir," he whispered, trying it on for size. His dream of the Academy had never seemed so close, so attainable. When Han stepped out of the infirmary, the first person he saw was Teroenza. Han nodded pleasantly to his employer. "Good morning, sir." The High Priest inclined his massive head. "And to you, Pilot Drago. Allow me to present someone you are going to be spending a lot of time with during your employment with us." The High Priest beckoned, and Han heard someone behind him. He whirled around and couldn't stop himself from taking a quick step back. The first impression was of height, the second was of sharp teeth and knife-like claws. This being stood nearly 3 meters tall, taller even than a Wookiee. The creature had a mouthful of needle-like fangs and claws that looked like they could rip through Durasteel. It was furred, but it wore a pair of breeches. A curved knife hung on its belt, and a holstered blaster was strapped to its thigh. Sleek muscles rippled everywhere. The newcomer grinned, bearing even more of those teeth. "Greetings," it said, speaking basic with a pronounced lisp. "This is Murg," Teroenza introduced the being. "He's a Togorian, one of the most honorable sentients in this galaxy. The Togorian reputation for honesty and loyalty is unparalleled. Did you know that?" Han looked up at the huge being and swallowed. No," he managed. "We've assigned Murg to be your bodyguard, Pilot Drago. On planet or off, Murg will accompany you everywhere. Isn't that correct, Murg?" "Murg has given word of honor," the Togorian affirmed. The High Priest folded his undersized arms across his massive body, and his mouth curved up in what almost appeared to be a mocking smile. "Murg is going to make very sure, Pilot Drago, that no matter where you go or what you do, you will be safe." Chapter 4. Murg. Which, by the way, I believe the cat-looking thing right over here, I believe that is Murg. The thing holding the blaster. Han stared at the huge, black-furred creature, realizing that the jig was definitely up. Teroenza's meaning was unmistakable. Step out of line and Murg will rip you in two. Han eyed the Togorian, realizing that the alien could easily do just that. He managed to pull himself together and smiled up at the Togorian. "Pleased to meet you, Murg," he said. "It'll be nice to have real company on these long flights." "Yes," the bodyguard said, stepping closer. Han realized with dismay that the top of his head barely reached the Togorian's breastbone. The alien appeared to be appeared so feline that Han was surprised to realize he didn't have a tail. Merg enjoys space travel, the bodyguard said in his strongly accented, lisping basic. His facial fur was black, but his whiskers and chest fur were white. His eyes were a startling light blue, with brilliant green slitted pupils. Merg goes mini spaceports. The more the better. Han had a little trouble understanding the Togorian's basic, but he could make it out. The young Corellian wondered just how smart this being was. Have to get to know him, Han decided. Just because he can't speak good basic doesn't mean he's dumb. But if he is, Han smiled. We thought we'd give you a day to settle in, Pilot Drago, Terenza said. Move into the quarters we've assigned you in the administration building. Merg will show you where it is. Then, tomorrow, we'd like you to begin ferrying goods and personnel back and forth between the colonies. By the time our next shipment of spice is delivered to our space station, you'll be ready to fare that down for us. After today, I'm going to order Jalnus Nebel, our other pilot, to take a rest. He's been working too hard. Han nodded. I've got to meet up with the Sullustan and compare notes. That'll be fine. Can I look around a bit? I'd like to check out the lay of the land. Taro Enza inclined his massive head. Certainly, as long as Merg accompanies you, and you follow all safety regulations while touring the factories. Of course, Han agreed. Taro Enza bowed slightly. If you'll excuse me, we are expecting a shipment of pilgrims to come down from our orbiting space station this morning. I have much to do as I prepare to welcome them. Han nodded, thinking about what lay ahead for those pilgrims. He knew that mining spice was considered dangerous, an extremely unpleasant duty, matter of fact. Being sent to the spice mines of Kessel was a common punishment for felons, but he knew very little about what happened to the spice once it was mined. Well, he intended to find out. Maybe there was some way he could turn the situation even more to his advantage. You never knew. It never paid to leave stones unturned, and Han Solo's book, knowledge frequently led to power, or at least to a faster escape. Merg led Han up a paved path through the jungle until they reached a large, very modern building. Administration Center, the Togorian said, indicating the building. The bodyguard led Han around to a side entrance and then down a corridor until he reached a door. You, Merg, sleep here, he said, opening the door. Inside was a small suite consisting of a bedroom, refresher unit, and a small sitting room. Han was pleased to see that Taro Enza had been mindful of the terms of the contract. In one corner of the bedroom was a fully equipped sim unit. Merg walked to the door of the bedroom and waved a clawed hand at it. Yours. Pilots sleep here. But where will you sleep? Han asked. As expected, Merg indicated the sitting room. Merg here. Great, Han said. These priests don't trust me any more than I trust them. With Merg sleeping between me and the door to the outside, I'll be taking a big chance trying to sneak out at night. Just great. That doesn't look very comfortable to me, Han said, doing his best imitation of wide-eyed innocence. Inwardly, he was wondering whether Merg was a sound sleeper. Maybe you should get a room of your own so you can sleep comfortably. Merg most comfortable when he is keeping word of honor, the Togorian said. Han stared at the cat-like being. Had he glimpsed a flash of humor in those blue-green eyes with their slitted pupils? Merg give word of honor to watch pilot always, so Merg must comfortable here. Han nodded. Right. He stared for a moment at the blaster in the Togorian's holster. I had a blaster when I came here, but I don't know where it is now, he commented. I guess I'll need to ask about getting it back. Pilot not need blaster. Merg flexed his fingers, and their tractable claws popped out. High priest say pilot not need blaster. But what if I get attacked by some kind of predator? Han waved at the omnipresent jungle outside the building. There were probably dozens of predators who might enjoy hunting an off-worlder, either for food or fun. The giant alien shook his whiskered head. Never happen. Pilot have Merg, who has blaster. That's true, Han said. Mentally, he made a note to ask Taro Enza for some kind of weapon. He felt naked without one, even after only having one for a couple of days. So, Merg, shall we go exploring? Han asked. I don't have any baggage to unpack, as you can see. Explore where? The Torgan asked. I'd like to take a tour. Like to tour the factories, Han said, and this administration center. Fine, the Togorian said. Come, pilot. Right behind you, Han said, suiting his action to his words. They walked the corridors of the administration center, glanced in at the mess hall, toured the guards' wing, and peeked at the priest quarters. When Han caught a glimpse of the armory, he realized that the Elysian priests must be afraid of a pilgrim uprising, because the percentage of guards to workers was high. The armory boasted a lot of heavy-duty riot control armament, force pikes, and stun gas. The guards they met came from many different worlds. Besides humans, Han saw Rhodians, Celestins, Twi'leks, and porcine Gamorreans. So let me get this straight, he said to Merc as they skirted an area in the administration center that signs in many languages identified as restricted access. The guards all sleep here most of the time, but why don't they sleep near the Pilgrim's dormitory, if the priests want to make sure the workers stay under control? Sleep time not problem, the Togorian said in his halting basic. After pilgrims are exalted, can barely walk. Go sleep right away. Only time pilgrims get mad, angry at bosses, is before exaltation. Makes sense, Han thought dourly. Give the addicts their fix, and then they just sleep it off until the next day. Then the pilot stopped in mid-word when he glimpsed something large and grayish gliding far down the corridor in the off-limits area. Han squinted into the dimness. Hey, what was that? He muttered. That looked just like a... Han broke off as the object turned the corner. He started after it at a good clip. Merg made a futile grab for his charge, but Han was quicker than the big alien and dodged. He jogged down the forbidden hallway, listening hard for the sound of footsteps, but none came. When he reached the junction of the corridors, Han turned to stare up the one where he'd glimpsed that flicker of gliding motion. His eyes widened. Hey, it's a hut! What's a hut doing here? There was no mistaking the identity of that huge slug-like form reclining on its repulsor lift sled. As he hesitated, Merc pounced on him as though he were a Vrelt and picked up the Corellian bodily. Han repressed a yelp of dismay as the Togorian tucked him under one muscled arm and ran back down the corridor until they were back in the unrestricted access section of the center. Merc set Han back on his feet and flexed a hand under the Corellian's nose. My people teach everyone entitled to one mistake, the bodyguard said. Pilot just have his. No more mistakes, or Merg have to teach pilot like little cub. Merg has given word of honor, remember. Understood? Han eyed the claws that gleamed under his nose, sharp and shiny as razors. Yeah, he managed to say. I understand, Merg. Humans just get, curious, you know? Curiosity fatal sometimes, Merg growled. I see your point, Han said dryly. Or rather, your points. Merg stared at the sharp, shining tip of his claws, then his muzzle lifted back from his fangs, and he made a low, mewling sound. For a moment, Han froze. Then he looked at the Togorian and realized this was the alien's form of laughter. Evidently, Merg had caught the joke. Han managed a weak chuckle. So, how about we get some food and then check out one of those factories, eh, pal? He asked. Merg always hungry, the Togorian agreed, leading the way toward the mess hall. What means this word, pal? Yeah. What means this word, pal? He asked. Oh, a pal is a friend, a buddy, you know? Someone you spend time with that you like, Han explained. Yes, the Togorian said, nodding. Pilot means packmate. Right. Good, the bodyguard said. Merg misses his packmates. Han recalled Terenza saying that his people came from Nalhutta, the Hutt homeworld, but Han hadn't realized that meant there were Hutts living on Alesia. When questioned, Merg confirmed that he had seen several of the slug masters who ride on air, as he called them. There's only one reason Hutts are here, Han thought. They're the real masters of Alessia. After all, they dominate the contraband spice trade. Lunch was good, if unimaginative, and, to Han's taste, lacking in seasoning. Still, the cook was no slouch. His or her bread was very good, Han thought as he chewed on a bite of Alderaanian flatbread. He realized suddenly, with a pang, that it had been nearly a day since he thought of Dulana. The thought made him feel vaguely disloyal, but then he took himself in hand. Dulana wouldn't want him to mope and grieve over her. She'd always enjoyed life, and she wouldn't expect Han not to just because she was gone. Oh, yeah, I forgot to mention, Dulana died protecting Han as he got away. He came back out of his reverie to find Merc watching him curiously. "Pilot is thinking of someone far away," the Togorian observed, waving the bone he had just finished gnawing. Tiny fragments of raw meat still clung to it, but Merg had cleaned it impressively, Han thought. He had to get every little bit. It required a lot of raw meat to keep that massive body going. "Yeah," Han agreed with a sigh. "Someone about as far away as anyone can be." "Pilot have sweetheart?" Han shook his head. "Well, there have been a few girls here and there," he admitted, "but nobody special. No, I was thinking of the person who more or less raised me. Dulana is the Wookiee that kind of was his surrogate mother on board the freighter where he grew up. Dulana died protecting him while he was trying to escape, so right before all this happened. Merg took a huge gulp of some foamy stuff from a tankard. "Humans raise young much differently than my people do," he said. "Really? Tell me about your world." Merg obediently launched into a description of Togoria, a world where males and females, though equal, did not mix their societies. Males lived a nomadic hunting existence, flying over the plains on their huge domesticated flying reptiles called Moskoths. They hunted in packs. The females, on the other hand, had domesticated animals for meat, so they did not need to hunt. They lived in cities and villages, and it was the female Togorians who had developed all of the planet's technology. "Well, if your people don't live together, how do you," Han searched for a polite term, "get together, to reproduce?" "We travel to city to stay with our mates once each year," Merg said. "Between times, we think often of each other. Togorians very emotional people, capable of great love," he added earnestly. "Especially males. Great love is why Merg is here. Males of my species rarely leave our world. Does Pilot know that?" "I do now," Han said. "So, Merg, when you say great love made you come to Alessia, what do you mean? Do you have a mate?" The Togorian nodded. "Promised mate. Someday be mated for life, if Merg can but find her." The huge alien sighed, looking so woeful that Han felt sorry for him. "What's her name?" "Marav. Beautiful, beautiful Marav. As Togorian females do, she decided to take a look at Big Galaxy. Merg begged her not to go, but females very stubborn." The alien looked at Han, who nodded. "Yeah, I've run into that myself." "Marav gone long time years. When she not come home to be mated, Merg so sad that he cannot stay on Togoria. Must discover what happened to her." "So, did you?" Han took a sip of his Pilanis ale. "Merg traced her from world to world to world." "And?" Han prompted when the Togorian paused. "And Merg lost her, somewhere on Ord Mantell. Said he saw her board spaceship at spaceport. Or someone, sorry. On Ord Mantell. Merg checked schedules, find out ship had many pilgrims on board. Several ports of call for ship. Merg took chance, come here, because so many pilgrims come here." The big felinoid sighed heavily and nibbled on a meat dripping bone. "Gamble no good. Merg ask, priest say no Togorians here. Merg not know where else to go. Merg need credits to continue search." The alien swallowed a last bite, and his whiskers actually drooped. So you decided to take a job as a guard here while you get enough money to go on searching, Han said, guessing at the logical end of the story. Yes. Han shook his head. That's sad, pal. I hope you find her, I really do. It's tough to lose people that you love. The bodyguard nodded. After lunch, they headed down to the factories and walked around the huge buildings. Han sniffed the air, smelling the odor of the different spices mingling. His nose tingled slightly, and he wondered if just smelling the spice could be intoxicating. He waved at the Glitterstem building. Let's go inside. I've heard about how they process the spice. I'd like to see it for myself. When they walked into the cavernous building, a guard stopped them and conferred with Merg, who explained who Han was. The Rodian guard on duty gave them badges and infrared goggles, then waved them on in. Goggles? Han said in Rodian. He understood the language perfectly, but his pronunciation was a bit laborious. We have to wear them? The guard's purple eyes sparkled at hearing a human speak his language. Yes, Pilot Drago, he said. Below the ground there are no visible lights permitted. You take the turbolift down. Each level down represents a 1-grade increase in the quality of spice. The longest and best fibers are produced far below ground to eliminate any possibility of their being ruined by light. Okay, Han said, beckoning to Merg. The two walked between aisles of supplies to reach the platform turbolift in the center of the facility. Let's go all the way down and see the really good stuff, he said to the Togorian. Privately, Han was wondering whether he might be able to light finger some of those tiny black vials. Selling a little Glitterstem on the side in a port city would increase his credit account by leaps and bounds. Han pushed the button for the bottom floor, and the platform, swaying slightly, started down. Cool air wafted up from the depths as the turbolift went down in pitch darkness. The draft felt wonderful after the humid heat of the Elysian jungle. Within one floor, all light was gone. Han fumbled for his goggles, pulled them up over his eyes. Immediately he could see, though everything was in shades of black and white. The illumination came from small light inserts in the walls. The turbolift plunged downward, and Han could see the workers as they crouched over their workstation. Piles of raw, fibrous thread studded with minuscule crystals lay piled below them. Finally, 6 floors down, the turbolift ground to a halt. Han and Merg got off. Have you ever been here before? He asked the bodyguard softly. Merg's neck fur was standing on end, and his white whiskers bristled beneath his goggled eyes. No, the Togorian whispered back. My people are plains dwellers, not like caves, not like dark. Merg will be happy when Pilot wishes to leave this place. Only Merg's word of honor keeps him here in a wretched darkness. Steady, Han said. We won't be here that long. I just want to get a look around. He led the way into the factory. The cavernous area was filled with soft swishings, but was otherwise silent. Long tables lined the walls and were ranged in the aisleways. Each table was a workstation, and a worker sat or crouched according to his, her, or its individual anatomy before the table. There were many humans, Han realized, sitting on tall stools hunched over their work. Few looked up as Han and Merg went up to the level supervisor, a furred Devorian female, and identified themselves. The supervisor waved a reddish, sharp-nailed hand at the floor. My workers are the most skilled, she said proudly. It takes skill to measure and trim the number of fibrous strands so each dose will contain the correct amount of spice. It is essential, but very difficult, to line up the fibers so precisely that they will activate at the same moment when exposed to visible light. Is it a mineral? Han asked. I know it's mined. It is naturally occurring, but we don't know how it's formed, Pilot. We believe it may have a biological origin, but we're not sure. It's found deep in the tunnels on Kessel, and it must be mined in total darkness, just as you see here. And the strands have got to be put into these casings just right. Correct. Improper alignment can cause the tiny crystals to fracture against each other. If that happens, they grind each other into a far less potent and valuable powder. It can take a skilled worker an hour to properly align just 1 or 2 cylinders of Glitterstem. I see, Han said, fascinated. Do you mind if we just wander around? I promise we won't touch anything. You may, however, please avoid distracting any of the workers while they are aligning the spice. One inadvertent twist as I said, could ruin an entire thread. I understand, Han said. The raw glitterstim threads were all black, but Han knew from hearing about it that they would shine blue when they ignited invisible light. Han stopped behind one of the human workers and watched in fascination as the worker separated out threads of ebony-colored spice, aligning them with the utmost care. The threads curled around the worker's fingers, some of them as fine spun as silk, but the tiny crystals made them incredibly sharp. The worker positioned one group of incredibly tangled threads in the jaws of a tiny vise, then proceeded to painstakingly separate out the threads until the crystalline structures were aligned. The worker's fingers moved almost too fast to watch, and Han realized that he was watching a highly skilled craftsman. No, woman. He was amazed that these pilgrims could actually accomplish something requiring this much dexterity, after seeing them last night following the exaltation. He more or less assumed they would be getting tongue-tied, sorry. They were dull-witted cretins. They certainly looked like it. The glitterstim worker took out a minuscule set of pliers to untangle a particularly bad snarl. She wormed the narrow-nosed pliers into the tangle, peering intently to find the place where the sharp little crystals were caught together. The fibrous glitterstim curled around her hands like tiny living tentacles, the sharp little crystal glimmering. The worker abruptly brought her hand back, tugging, and suddenly the snarl straightened out until all the fibers aligned perfectly, except one. Han watched in distress as one sharp-studded strand cut between the woman's forefinger and thumb. A thin line of blood welled from the deep gash. Han sucked in a breath. A few centimeters deeper and the tendon in her thumb would have been severed. She hissed with pain, then muttered something in Basic, and, freeing her hand, held it to stop the bleeding. Han froze as he heard her accent. This pilgrim was Corellian. He hadn't even looked at her before, hidden as she was by the shapeless tan robe, her cap pulled down tightly over her goggled head. But now he realized she was young, not old. She grimaced slightly as she examined the cut, turning her hand over. She twisted in her seat and held her hand over the floor so the blood wouldn't drip onto her workstation. Han knew he wasn't supposed to speak to the worker, but she wasn't working at the moment, and he was concerned. She was bleeding profusely. "You're hurt," he said. "Let me call the supervisor so she can fix you up." The girl, she was his age, possibly younger, started slightly, then looked up at him. Her face was a whitish-green blur underneath her goggles and cap, and seemed deathly pale in the infrared light. No wonder, Han thought, cooped up down here all day long, no exposure to sunlight. "No, please don't," she said, speaking Basic with the soft accent that placed her as being from Corellia's southern continent. "If she sends me to the infirmary, I'll miss the exaltation." She shivered at the thought, though it might also have been from the cold. Han himself was beginning to feel chilly, and he hadn't been down here for hours. How did Pilgrim stand it, working down here in the cold darkness all day? "But that cut looks nasty," Han protested. She shrugged. "The bleeding is stopping." Han could see that was true. "But what about—" She shook her head, halting him in mid-sentence. "I appreciate your concern, but it's nothing. Happens all the time." With a wry smile, she held out her hands. Han sucked in a breath. Her fingers, wrists, and forearms were crisscrossed with tiny slashes. Some were old and white and healed, but many were dark, still fresh and painful. Han saw small phosphorescent spots between her fingers and realized they must be the fungus he'd discovered on himself that morning. As he watched, a phosphorescent tendril of the stuff suddenly spread, growing toward the cut between her finger and thumb. She uttered a small, soft exclamation and pulled it free. "The fungus loves fresh blood," she said, evidently noticing his distaste. "It can infect a cut and make you sick very easily." "Disgusting stuff," Han said. "Are you sure you don't need to get that treated?" She shook her head. "As you can see, it happens all the time. Excuse me, but you're Corellian, aren't you?" "So are you," Han said. "I'm Vic Drago, new pilot. And you are?" Her mouth tightened slightly. "I'm not really supposed to be talking. I'd better get back to work." Murg, who had been watching in silence, suddenly spoke up. "Worker is correct. Pilot must let worker return to work now." "All right, pal, I understand," Han said to the Togorian. But then he added to the Corellian woman, "But maybe we could talk some other time, over supper maybe." She shook her head silently and turned back to her work. Merg motioned for Han to move on. The Corellian moved one step away, but continued talking. Okay, but you never know. We're bound to run into each other sometime. This place ain't all that big. So what's your name? She shook her head again, not speaking. Merg growled low in his throat, but Han just stood there stubbornly. The woman seemed disturbed by Merg's implied threat. As she fastened a bandage over her cut, she said, "We give up our names when we leave all worldly things for the spiritual sanctuary of Elysia." Han was feeling increasingly frustrated. Here was someone who knew this place intimately, and she was the first person from his home world he'd discovered here. "Please," he said as Merg pushed him slightly. "There must be some kind of way they refer to you," he said, smiling his most reassuring, charming smile. Merg growled again more loudly. He showed his fangs. The woman's eyes opened wide at the display of teeth. "I'm Pilgrim 921, she said hastily. Han got the impression that she had spoken up to save him from Merg's ire. Merg grabbed Han's arm and began walking away, effortlessly dragging the Corellian. "Thank you, Pilgrim 921, Han called back to her, waving jauntily as though being half carried away by the Togorian was a normal occurrence. "Good luck with those fibers. I'll be seeing you." She didn't respond. When Merg finally let go at the end of the aisle, Han followed the Togorian obediently, half expecting a lecture from the giant being. But Merg seemed satisfied that Han would now obey him, and had relapsed into his former wary silence. Han glanced back once and saw that the Corellian woman was again intent on her work, as though she'd already forgotten him. Pilgrim 921, he thought. I wonder if I'd even be able to recognize her. Between the goggles, the cap, and his impaired vision, he had no real idea of what she looked like, except for the fact that she was young. Han walked all the way around the facility, watching several other workers as they aligned threads and crystals so they were entirely symmetrical. He didn't attempt to speak to any of them. Finally, he came back to the Deveronian supervisor. "So when they finish their work, who encases the threads and crystals in the vials?" he asked. "That is done on the 5th floor, the supervisor told him. "Maybe I'll just head up there," Han said. "This is fascinating, you know." "Certainly," she said. Okay, so they finish up the processing of the really high-grade stuff up there, Han thought, as he and Merg ascended into the darkness. The Togorian let out a low yowl of protest when Han only took them up one floor. "Take it easy, Merg," Han said. "I just want to take a quick look around here." He wandered the aisles, trying unobtrusively to spot the place where the high-grade glitterstim was enclosed in the tiny black vials that all glitterstim users would recognize. When he reached that area, however, his heart sank. 4 armed guards stood by the conveyor belt, watching the little vials as the workers brought their full baskets over and dumped them. Han felt an air current waft past him, realizing that there was a small heating unit down there, warming the chill, evidently for the comfort of the guards. 4 guards? Han peered harder into the dimness. No, hold on a second. He saw a blur of movement, but couldn't discern anything for a long second. Then as he focused his eyes, he slowly made out oily, pebbled blackness barely visible against the black stone wall. But there were eyes in the midst of that blackness. Beady, reddish-orange eyes. 4 of them. Han squinted, holding still, straining his vision. Then he saw 2 blasters, each strapped to a warty black thigh. Ara, he realized. Skin changers. The Ara were an alien species from a planet on the other side of the galaxy. Denizens of Ar could gradually change color to match the color of the background behind them. This ability made them very difficult to see, especially in darkness. Han had heard of the Ara before, but never run into any until now. They were reptilian creatures, which explained why this section of the below-ground factory was heated. Many reptiles became sluggish and dull-witted when it was cold. Han peered into the dimness and slowly, gradually made out the outlines of 2 Ara guards. They had pebbly textured skin, clawed hands and feet, and a small frill of skin running down their backs. Their heads were large with overhanging brow ridges, beneath which their eyes seemed doubly small. Their faces had short muzzles, and when one of the creatures opened its mouth, Han glimpsed a narrow, sticky red tongue and sharp white teeth. An upstanding frill of skin ran between their eyes, or from between their eyes, back over the tops of their heads to connect with the frill running down their backs. Despite their clumsy appearance, they seemed fast on their feet. Han decided that he didn't want to tangle with them. Although shorter than he was, they were broad in the shoulders and certainly outweighed him by a considerable margin. Han sighed. Scratch plan A. The Aura aside, the other guards, 2 Rhodians, a Devorian male, and a Twi'lek, looked mean and obviously meant business. Fad. They were Gamorreans, so there wasn't a chance of being able to bewilder, confuse, distract, or otherwise fast talk any of them into handing over a fortune in spice. Han grimaced and started back for Murg and the turbolift. And there is no plan B, he thought glumly. Guess I'll just have to earn all my credits the honest way. It never even occurred to him that ferrying spice around the galaxy was, in itself, highly illegal. Pilgrim 921 nibbled on a stale grain cake and tried to forget the young Corellian she had seen earlier. She was a pilgrim, after all, part of the All, one with the One, and worldly concerns such as good-looking young men were behind her forever. She was here to work so that she might be exalted and offer her prayers for the blessing of the One as part of the All, and conversations with young men named Vic had no part in that. Still, she wondered what he looked like beneath those goggles. What color was his hair? His eyes? That smile of his made warmth blossom inside her, despite the cold. Shaking her head, Pilgrim 921, I missed my name, tried to exorcise the victory of Vic Drago's lopsided, heart-stopping smile. She needed to pray, to offer proper devotion. She must do penance for separating herself from the One, lest she be cast out from the All. Still, those sacrilegious thoughts kept intruding. Thoughts. Memories, too. He was Corellian, and so was she. Pilgrim 921 thought of her home world, and for just an instant allowed herself to remember it, to remember her family. Were her parents still alive? Her brother? How long had she been here? 921 tried to remember, but the days here were all the same. Work, a few morsels of unappetizing food, exaltation and prayers, then exhausted sleep. One day flowed into each other, and Alessia had almost no seasons. For a moment she wondered just how long she'd been here. Months? Years? How old was she? Did she have wrinkles? Gray hair? 921's scarred hands flew to her forehead. Her cheekbones beneath flesh, prominent bones. Much more prominent than they had ever been before. But no wrinkles. She was not old. She might have been here months, but not years. How old had she been when she heard of Alessia and sold all her jewelry to buy passage on a pilgrim ship? 17? She'd just finished the last of her undergraduate schooling and had been looking forward to going off-world to attend the university on Coruscant. She'd been going to study archaeology, with an emphasis on ancient art. Yes, that was it. She'd even spent a couple of summers working on a dig, learning to preserve ancient treasures. She'd wanted to become a museum curator. As a child, history had always been her favorite subject. She loved learning about the Jedi Knights and was fascinated by their adventures. She'd grown up in the aftermath of the Clone Wars and had been interested in that too, and the birth of the Republic, so very, very long ago. 921 sighed as she swallowed a bite of dusty grain cake. Sometimes it bothered her when she realized that her memories were fading, that her intelligence seemed to be fading along with her ability to perceive the world outside. She knew that as a pilgrim she was supposed to eschew all worldly things, to expunge from her mind and the body the appreciation of fleshly pleasures. In the old days, pleasure and having fun had been the focus of her life. In those days, her life had little purpose compared to now. In the old days, she drifted from place to place, subject to subject, party to party, and it had all been so meaningless. Life now had meaning. Now she was exalted. Every night the One conferred blessings upon her through the priests. Exaltation was the way they all communicated with the pilgrims. It was a deeply spiritual experience, and it felt so good. 921 thought that she'd successfully managed to expunge all memory of Vic Drago and his smile from her mind, so she went back to work on her glitter stem pile, only to find herself wondering minutes later whether he'd really looked for her, or whether he'd really look for her, try to talk to her again. 921 shivered in the ever-present dank chill and tried very hard to forget Vic Drago and all he stood for. With that, I'm going to take a quick break, grab some more coffee, and I will be right back. And for anybody watching, feel free to take this time to stretch your legs, go grab a drink yourself, whatever you'd like to do, and then I'll be back in just a couple minutes. Hey, I'm back. So, got some more coffee, as you can see. Yeah, and then I just took the fast. Yeah, I just took the leftover milk I had from before and steamed it again. Yeah, same coffee. I made enough of the drip coffee for about two, well, of these cups. This is like 2 coffee mugs worth. That's a really big mug. Um, it's basically 4 cups. So yeah, I just poured the rest of the pot in there, some sugar, and steamed some more milk. About half of this cup is steamed milk, so it's not all coffee, but yeah. So let's see, where were we? Let's see. So, oh yeah, 921 was trying to remember, or trying to forget rather, how much of a heartthrob Han is. So let's see. That night, Han skipped devotionals in favor of spending time with several of the Sims. This was his first opportunity to earn an honest living, and he didn't want to mess up. Han knew that citizens complained about how hard they had to work, and he figured that was essential for success. It was true that begging, pickpocketing, burglary, and scamming citizens frequently required considerable time and effort, but Han knew that somehow it just wasn't comparable. Heading for the sim station in his bedroom, Han began skimming through the systems, accessing what was available to him. Teroenza had been as good as his promise, and the simulations were there. He scanned what was available, chose the sims he wanted to work on, and ordered the system to prepare several sequences. He was careful to specify atmospheric turbulence to be included in each training exercise. He looked up at Merg, who was standing there watching him. "I've got to work for a while," he said. "Why don't you take some time for yourself?" Merg shook his head slowly. "Merg not leave pilot alone, against orders." "Okay," Han shrugged. "Your choice." Merg watched nervously as Han put on the the visa hood. Yeah, I think that's right. Cutting himself off from contact with his real surroundings and plunging himself into a training flight that felt exactly like the real thing. The Togorian was uncomfortable with technology. Han let himself sink into the sim, and within minutes the sim had accomplished one of its primary purposes. Han quite forgot that it was a sim. He was convinced that he was really piloting, really negotiating asteroid fields at high speeds, really piloting through the Alessian atmosphere, really landing the craft under all sorts of adverse conditions. The Corellian emerged from the sim 2 hours later, having successfully landed, flown, taken off, and performed the full range of maneuvers possible with the shuttle he'd be flying to Colony 2 and Colony 3 on the morrow. He'd also reviewed the controls on the transport vessels he'd be flying. Excuse me. The Alessian Dream was being converted to manual piloting, as well as those on Teroenza's private yacht. By this time, the short Alessian day was far spent. Merg was dozing on the chair, but awoke instantly when Han stretched. Han eyed the Togorian, regretting that the alien was so alert. It was going to be very difficult to do the nighttime prowling that he had in mind. Merg walked along behind the pilot, pleased that his charge had suggested heading over to the mess hall for a late supper. The Togorian was always hungry. His people were used to hunting and killing, then sharing their kills, so fresh meat was a constant part of their diets. Here he had to make do with raw meat that had been frozen. Before the pilot, this is Han that they're referring to, before Pilot had come into his life, he'd been free at times to enter the jungle and hunt, so he could keep his claws and his skills sharpened. He missed his Moskoth, missed flying through the air on her back, feeling her powerful wing muscles propelling them through the skies of Togoria. Murg sighed. The skies on Tagoria were a vivid blue-green, much different from the washed-out blue-gray color of Alessia's sky. He missed them. Would he ever see them again? Would he ever fly as Mothgoth towards a crimson sunset on those vivid skies? The priest had made him sign a 6-month contract for his service as a guard. He'd given his word of honor to fulfill that contract. It would be many 10 days before he could return to his search for Mrav. Murg pictured her in his mind, her cream-colored fur, her orange stripes, her vivid yellow eyes. Lovely Mrav. She'd been part of his life for so long now that not knowing her whereabouts was like an aching wound inside him. Could she have gone back to Tagoria? Was she back on their world waiting for him? Murg wished he could send a message to his homeworld and ask whether Mrav had returned, but messages sent over interstellar distances were very expensive, and sending one would add nearly 2 months to his time here on Alessia. Still, Murg considered, then thought that perhaps on one of their trips to Spice to Nal Hutta, Pilot would not mind if Murg sent a message. The Tagorian didn't really trust the Alessian priest enough to send a message from this world. Pilot seemed like a decent fellow for a human, Murg mused. Sly, quick, always looking for a way to get around things, but humans were frequently like that. At least Pilot had accepted Murg's dominance as pack leader. That was smart of him. He'd live much longer that way. Murg really hoped that Pilot would continue to be smart. He liked him, and didn't want to have to hurt him. But if Pilot tried to break the rules, Murg would not hesitate to hurt, even kill the Corellian. Taro Enza had given Murg specific orders, and the Tagorian would carry them out to the best of his ability. He'd given his word of honor, and that was the most important thing in the universe to his people. The Tagorian absently groomed his whiskers and facial fur, reflecting that as long as Pilot didn't step out of line, everything was going to be just fine. Chapter 5, Spice Wars. The next day, Han took the Elysian shuttle to Colony 2 and Colony 3. He discovered that he really enjoyed piloting bigger ships, and his piloting was perfect. He managed to find a few extra minutes on his return run to Colony 1 to practice low-altitude flying, swooping the shuttle so low that the nearly brushed the tops of the jungle trees. Beside him in the co-pilot seat, Murg alternated between exhilaration and terror as the Tagorian experienced swoops, barrel rolls, and even upside-down high-speed flying. Han was in his element, putting the shuttle through maneuvers he'd only done previously during Sims. The Corellian found himself whooping joyously at the sheer thrill of it all. For his last best bit of precision flying, Han sent the shuttle hurtling down a river-cut canyon. Chapter 5. I don't know how you can read nonstop for so out loud. I don't know. I've done... I mean, it's not so much different from streaming where you're talking a lot, but I've also done a lot of business consulting and coaching where I'm pretty much on the phone talking for several hours at a time, so I guess it doesn't really faze me anymore. I do keep going my coffee, though, because my throat's getting a little dry. Godly vocal cords. I try. Murg's voice kind of kills me. My vocal cords. Coffee is your support. True hero. Yeah. I don't know what I'd do without coffee. You should see... I might have to do... one of these days, I might have to do like a little quick Twitch tour of my apartment, because it's pretty much decorated exactly like a coffee shop. Like, I've got a big living room, dining room, and kitchen that are all like, they're all kind of the same room. Like, it's a big open floor plan. For a one-bedroom apartment, the place is pretty big. But I've got like an old coffee shop menu up on the wall, and like a Guinness mirror and stuff like that. It very much looks like a coffee shop. I like it. If you didn't have coffee, you'd be sleeping probably. I don't know. I would, when I read, I sleep 2 pages in. I've been an avid reader since I was a little kid too. So, I don't know. I can sit and read a book. If I'm not reading it out loud, I can get through a book super quick too. Room. Yeah. Thank you. Um, but um, yeah. Girlfriend reads super fast too. Yeah. Um, I'm slow as shit. That's okay. Um, I don't know. I just always have been kind of a fast reader. One page, 10 minutes. No kidding. That's all right as long as it's an interesting page. But yeah, I could get through a book like this, just reading silently. I could probably get through this in about 2, 3 days. Um, yeah, probably 2 or 3 days. I'm like, it's like most people with Netflix these days, how they'll binge watch a show on Netflix and get through like a whole season. That's how I used to be with books. I would just like binge read the entire book because I didn't want to stop in the middle of the story. So I would read whole books in a day. Um, I don't read nearly as much as I used to, mostly just because life is so busy. There's so much stuff to do. But when I was a kid and even in high school, uh, I would read like crazy. I would read so much. How long has this been my hobby? Reading books or the coffee or what? I guess which part? um, Books, yes. Oh, I've been reading since I was old enough to read. Um, I can remember reading Star Wars books specifically back when I was like 10 or 11, I think, is when I started reading like Star Wars novels. I started with the Young Jedi Knight series, which is another one that I want to get to in the audiobook cafe content because it's the first book in that whole series is just so good. And actually, um, one of the really cool things from it is the current characters that they have in the Disney version of Star Wars. So Rey and Kylo Ren. Um, you can actually see where they pulled a ton of those characters from the Young Jedi Knight series, which is by Kevin J. Anderson. Um, and basically, in those books, you have Jason and Jaina Solo, who are twins, much like Luke and Leia. And Rey reminds me a lot of Jaina, and Kylo, when he's not being a crazy psychopath, reminds me a lot of Jason. So it's pretty interesting how they pulled that from them. But we'll get to those eventually. So much time since you started. I started at 11th grade. My first book was Hunger Games. Oh, cool. Hunger Games was a good series. I enjoyed reading those. Yeah, I've been reading like yeah, it was a really good series. I've been reading books like this for 23 years. I guess. Yeah, which is insane when it was original. Yeah. uh, yeah, we'll hop back into the book here for a bit. Now everyone copied your style and it's now cancer. Yeah, yeah. So the next day, Han took the Elysian shuttle to Colony 2 and... oh, I already read that. Da, 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 da. Oh, here we go. Han sent the shuttle hurtling down a river-cut canyon, skimming between the rock walls with so little room to spare that Murg yowled, shut his eyes, and refused to open them. Once they were soaring through open skies again, Han had to shake the Togorian's arm and repeatedly reassure the big alien that he was finished practicing for the day. Murg's certain that pilot is crazy, the Togorian said, cautiously opening his eyes and straightening up in his seat. Murg flies on his Mothgoth at home, but not like that. Mothgoths have more sense than to fly like that. Murg have more sense too, pilot. The Togorian gave Han a plaintive glance. Promise Murg not to fly crazy again. But Murg, Han said, carefully setting them down on the landing field at Colony 1. I've got to practice every chance I get. You see, he hesitated, then decided to trust Murg with part of the truth. I sort of stretched the facts a little when I told Taro Enza about my flying experience. I really am a champion pilot, that's the truth, but I need to practice with the shuttle and with the bigger ships. Sims are fine, but they can't beat the real thing. Murg gave Han a long, level look, then nodded. Murg understands. Pilot trusts Murg not to say this to Taro Enza. Yeah, something like that, Han said. Can I? Trust you, I mean? The Togorian groomed his white whiskers thoughtfully. As long as Pilot does not crash, Murg does not talk. Fair enough, pal, Han said with a grin. When he and Murg came down the ramp from the ship, Veritol was there waiting for them in the pouring rain. By this time, Han was growing used to the daily downpours, though the steamy heat still exhausted him. The High Priest wishes to see you at once, Pilot Drago, Veritol said. The Secredot led the Corellian and his bodyguard to the High Priest's personal quarters, which occupied a large part of the underground level of the administration center. When Veritol keyed in the security bypass codes and they walked through the huge double doors into the High Priest's personal sanctum, Han couldn't repress a low whistle of amazement. Nice place. This is the High Priest's display room, Veritol said. He's an avid collector and very proud of his collection of rarities. He deserves to be, Han said sincerely. The room was easily 10 times the size of Han's little apartment on the first floor. Display tables, shelves, and racks showcased treasures and antiquities from around the galaxy. Sculptures from a dozen worlds, paintings, and other art objects were scattered amid ornate antique weapons. Tapestries hung from the walls. Rugs of exquisite beauty were covered by protective force fields that felt squishy underfoot as Han walked on them. Semi-precious gems adorned the collection of pipes and other musical instruments. Bottles of the rarest liqueurs in the entire galaxy were suspended in a gold-embossed rack. Han's fingers literally itched the whole time it took him to traverse the display room. If I could have 5 minutes alone in here, I'd be set for life, he thought, wistfully as he slowed down to peer at a Drell carved from living ice. The tiny statue was covered with a layer of dust, which was disturbed by Han's breath. It wafted up into the air, and the pilot sneezed thunderously. Dust or no dust, this place is worth several fortunes, if only. Sternly, Han reminded himself that he had turned over a new leaf, was an honest, hard-working citizen these days. Veritol led them through another security door into the High Priest's personal living quarters. The visitors were ushered into the room by an ancient Zysian majordomo, whom Taro Enza addressed as Gunnar Tas. The Zysian was humanoid, but he had wrinkly green skin that hung in flaccid wattles from his receding chin line. His orange eyes were rheumy, and he snuffled constantly, as though he had a sinus infection. Probably allergic to all that dust, Han thought. The High Priest waved Han and Murg to seats and addressed them. So good of you to come, Pilot Drago. I hear good things about your piloting from Colony 2 and 3. Today our medical droid placed our other pilot, Jalus Nebel, on indefinite sick leave, so you'll be taking his place on interstellar flights from now on. Han nodded, trying not to betray his excitement. Fine, sir, I'll keep on schedule. When do I go? The day after tomorrow, Terenza said. Murg will, of course, accompany you. What's the cargo and destination, sir? Han asked. You'll rendezvous with a ship from Nau Hutta at coordinates we provide you with at the last minute. Security is vital, as I'm sure you can understand. You know that we have had trouble with pirates in the past. Terenza accepted a small, limp creature from a tray that the majordomo held out to him, and paused to gulp it. Have you trained Murg as a gunner, pilot? No, not yet, sir. See that you do. A good pilot is prepared for all eventualities, correct? Yes, sir, Han said. I'll see to it. Sir, what's the cargo? You'll be carrying a load of processed carcinum and picking up a load of raw rill transshipped from Ryloth. But the ship I'm meeting is from Nalhutta? Yes, Teroenza did not expand upon this, so Han dropped the subject, resolving to keep his ears open. He sensed that there was more that the High Priest wasn't telling him, but he was hardly in a position to demand to know all the ins and outs. Terenza sat back on his massive haunches, small arms waving at the portal through which Murg and Han had entered. I gather you liked my display room? Liked? Han was able to speak with complete honesty. It was great, sir. I never saw so many treasures gathered together outside of a museum. My species is long-lived, as are our cousins the Hutts, Terenza said. I have been collecting for hundreds of standard years. Longer than you and your youth can imagine, pilot. I'd really like to get a grand tour sometime, Han said. I wish my collection were in condition to be viewed, Terenza said regretfully. Gunnar Toss, though an excellent cook and an efficient houseboy, hasn't the training to maintain it, much less catalog and arrange everything properly. And I'm too busy to indulge myself that way. The giant being gave them a dismissive wave of a tiny hand. That will be all for now. I shall see you upon your return, pilot. Yes, sir, Han stood and beckoned to Murg. They left, escorted by Veritil. Once outside, the Sacerdot went off on an errand, leaving them to themselves. Han glanced at his chrono and then at the westering sun. Tonight I'm going to start training you on gunner duties, he told the Togorian. But right now I think we're owed a break. Matter of fact, we're just in time to visit the refectory where the pilgrims eat. Let's go. Why? Murg asked. Pilot not want pilgrim food. Pilot and Murg eat in mess hall. Get decent food, not garbage. Han shook his head and started walking down the path that led through the jungle to the pilgrims area. I don't want to eat with the pilgrims, pal, he explained. I just want to talk to some of them. I figure at dinner they'll all be together and I can find them easier. Them? Murg echoed. How many is them? Well, you see, Han started, then he stopped, grimacing. Just one, he admitted. Pilgrim 921, the one I saw the other day. I'd like to see what she really looks like. Murg nodded. Ah, yes, Murg understands very well what Pilot wants. Han felt his face grow hot, and was glad that the Togorian wouldn't recognize that giveaway as a sign of embarrassment. You know, Murg, old pal, he said, deliberately changing the subject, you speak pretty good basic for someone who's been speaking it for less than a year. But there's one part of speech you ain't mastered yet, and that's the pronoun. Never thought I'd find myself playing schoolteacher, but here goes. The two walked on down the path together as Han laboriously covered the grammatical rules governing the use of pronouns. Once in the refectory, Han and Murg roamed the huge dining area. Han glanced from face to face, wondering if he'd managed to recognize her without the goggles in normal light. Her hair had been covered by the cap, so he didn't even know if it was dark or light. He walked faster, realizing the meal was nearly over, and he still hadn't found 921. Maybe she wasn't here. Maybe she ate during another shift, the way he heard some of the pilgrims did. But he thought most of the humanoids ate during this shift. There she is, that's her. Han wasn't even sure how he knew, but he was as positive as if he'd had a sign around her neck that read Pilgrim 921. Seen in normal light, he could tell that she was tall and slender, too slender, really. Her cheekbones stood out prominently, and her eyes seemed even larger than they were in her thin, excessively pale face. But too thin or not, she was quite simply lovely. Not classically beautiful, her jaw was a little too wide and squarish, her nose a bit too long for classic beauty, but lovely, oh yes. 921 had big blue-green eyes, long dark lashes, and poreless white skin. Several locks of short curly hair had escaped from beneath her pilgrim's cap, and Han saw that it was reddish gold, the color of a Corellian sunset on a clear day. The refectory hall was usually pretty quiet. The pilgrims didn't talk much, tired as they were from a long day's work in the factories and the approaching exaltation, but they usually ate in groups. 921 was all alone. Han saw that she was poking at her dinner, and after one look at the unappetizing mess of gruel-like porridge, limp greens, and flatbread on her plate, he didn't blame her. The food smelled bad, almost spoiled. Han's nose wrinkled as he pulled out seat opposite her and sat down. He was dimly aware of Murg leaning against the wall watching him. 921. I've got to get her to tell me her real name. Looked up, and her turquoise eyes widened as she recognized him. Han was inordinately pleased about that and grinned at her. Hello, found you again, see? She stared at him, eyes wide, then she looked down at her plate. Han leaned toward her. So, what's for dinner? Doesn't look great, I gotta admit. But you've got to do more than just push it around your plate, you know. She shook her head. Please go away. Her voice was barely above a whisper. I'm not supposed to be talking to you. You're not of the One. Sure I am, Han said. I'm just a little bit more of an individual one, I guess you'd say. 921's mouth quirked, very slightly. Han found himself wishing he could make her really smile. You don't know what you're talking about, Pilot Drago, she said softly. I'm afraid that's obvious. Well, proselytize to me then, Han said. I've got an open mind. Maybe you can convert me. He smiled, happy that he found her, and that she was at least talking to him. 921 shook her head. I'm afraid you're much too much of an unbeliever, Pilot, she said. Han reached out across the table and took her hand, the one she'd injured. It's Vic, he told her, having to fight a crazy impulse to tell her his real name. But he managed to resist. So, how's your hand? Any ill effects from the other day? When he'd first touched her, she'd stiffened as though to pull away, but then, when he inquired about the cut, she relaxed. It's healing, she told him, confirming what his eyes told him. It will just take a little time. It's a tough job working down there in the dark and the cold all day long, Han said. Wouldn't you rather do something a little easier? Like what? She asked. I don't know, he said. What are you good at? What have you studied? Well, at one time I wanted to be a curator in a museum, she said, sounding faintly wistful. I was going to study archaeology. I know quite a bit about that. But you came here instead of going on with your studies? Han guessed. Yes, 921 answered. This life is spiritually fulfilling. My old life was empty and meaningless. Han hesitated. How do you know that the doctrine they teach here is the right one? There are a lot of religions in the galaxy. She considered his question carefully, then finally replied, Because when we are exalted, I feel very close to the One. It's a mystical moment. I feel one with the All. I'm sure the priest must be divinely gifted to be able to offer the pilgrims the chance to be exalted. Han said. Sounds like maybe I should give it a try. Over my dead body, he thought, but was careful to conceal his true feelings. Perhaps you should, she said. It's time to head for the altar of promises now. Perhaps you'll be blessed by receiving the exaltation too. You never know, Han said. Can I walk you there? She smiled a little, eyes downcast. All right. They walked together up the jungle path, side by side, amid the pilgrims, with Murg trailing behind. Han tried to make conversation, but 921 was silent and unresponsive. When they reached the altar, Han did not withdraw to the back, but instead stood beside 921 in the midst of the group of believers. You shouldn't be here, she whispered. It's obvious you're not a pilgrim. If anyone complains, just tell them I'm a pilgrim candidate, Han said, trying to gently tease her, but 921 wasn't having it. She scowled and turned away from him, concentrating on the ceremony. Terawinza and the other priest treated the crowd of faithful to a devotion that was identical to the one Han had attended before. This time Han had little trouble resisting the effects of the exaltation. He remained clear-headed throughout it. Instead, he watched 921, saw her rapt face, and inwardly shook his head. How can she be taken in by this ridiculous bilge, he wondered. She's obviously intelligent. Why can't she see that however the priests do what they do, it's some kind of trick, not a divine gift? Han watched in distress as 921 sank to the ground to receive the exaltation. Then he crouched beside her as she writhed on the ground. It's a miracle our hearts don't just stop, he thought. Later, when the moment of exaltation was over and the priests were gone, he helped her to sit up. She was smiling, though very weak. You okay? He asked, concerned. The exaltation, whatever its other physical and emotional effects, seemed to leave the pilgrims drained. You don't look so good. I'm fine, she said, still trembling, and tried to get up. Han was quick to catch her and offer a steadying hand. Thank you, she whispered, her breath still ragged. I'll be fine now. I'll walk you back to the dorm, he said, just in case you look kind of shaky. She didn't argue as he took her arm, and they started back along the path. It was growing quite dark by now, and Alessia had no moon. Han could barely make out the path ahead, but 921 produced her goggles from the pocket of her robe and put them on. She led the way, but he kept hold of her arm to steady her. Hey! Thanks so much for the raid! Oh, hey everyone, how you guys doing? Thanks so much for that raid. Let me catch up real quick here. There was a ton of text all of a sudden. Dun dun dun. Hey bud, I'm going off. It's 2 a.m. Wish I could stay longer, but I'm falling asleep. Dun dun dun. Oh my god, Georgie. Oh, good homegirl. Turn to raid you, Raven. Yeah, thanks so much. Hi, Raven and everyone. Hey, Jokester. Oh my god, Kel'Thuzar. Yeah, no worries, Kel'Thuzar. Get some good rest. Get some sleep. I'm gonna keep going for a little while longer, but the video will be up tomorrow if you want to catch up on the bits that you missed. I'll try to remember to get it into the collection tomorrow too. Also, hi Lapis, hi Movikin, or Movikeen, Mo. I'm not actually quite sure how to pronounce the name. Also Georgie and Jokester, and I think I got everybody. Oh, thank you. Yeah, I haven't cut my hair in like 2 years. So it's been getting pretty long. So we're drinking a cafe au lait. See if I can get this on the camera without spilling any of it. So it is this coffee here. There we go. Yeah, that coffee. That's on the screen with a little chicory. We made it extra strong, and then with that we've got some sugar and steamed and foamed milk. Movikin, Dovahkiin, but Mo is fine. Oh, okay, like Skyrim. Mo is how you say it. How's the story going? I got my Star Wars book today. Oh, awesome. Yeah, the story's going pretty good. We're in chapter 5 now. I can give you the quick recap. So last week we learned a little bit about Han's early childhood. He used to be part of a actually pretty prominent family on Corellia, and then either his parents died or he was abducted or something like that. He got separated from them, lived as a street urchin basically, got taken in by this kind of asshole captain of a freighter who exploited him and other children to go beg and thieve and things like that. Was raised by a Wookiee named Dulana. Now he's a teenager, late teens. He escaped, but Dulana got killed in the process of protecting him while he escaped. Now he's on a humid planet with basically a cult on it, but they're paying him to be a freighter pilot. So he's learning how to fly and getting to use his piloting talents. And he's got a bodyguard who basically watches him and makes sure he doesn't do anything to mess up the cult or steal or anything like that, which is the cat-looking creature on the cover. And then he just met Pilgrim 921, which is the girl on the cover, and he's become quite smitten with her and vice versa. Oh, more text. Whoa, so much about Han I didn't know. You look so handsome on that book cover. Look at that pose. Yeah, I like Skyrim. You like Skyrim. I figured you for a cultured person, not like the people that never play Skyrim. I'm sensing a jab at Georgie there. Yeah. And this is just book 1. There's 3 books to this total story that tells basically how Han goes from being a kid all the way up to the events of A New Hope. This was the original Han Solo origin story before Disney bought out Lucasfilm and put out the Solo movie, which is crap compared to this. 2 more days and I play it. But yeah, I think that about catches you up on where we're at. You can see we're not too terribly far into the book, but we're getting there, about a quarter of the way through, maybe a little bit more. Let's see. So what's happened more recently? He caught up with Pilgrim 921, flirted with her some more. I apologize, Raven. I'll have to go say hi to my hubby. I'll leave you alert and come back soon, hopefully. Okay, cool. No worries. Thanks again for the raid. So yeah, he flirted with her. She's trying her best to stay devoted to the religion and everything, which basically, to do that, she had to get rid of her name, sell all of her worldly possessions, and she's basically a slave worker in a drug cooking den. But she's pretty caught up on the doctrine and everything. They left the mess hall basically, and Han's really trying to get in good with her. So he said he'd go attend one of their services with her. And in the service they do this weird thing that it's basically like giving drug addicts a hit of something. And so now he's helping her back after that. So let's see. Let's backtrack a little bit. So this is Han speaking. I'll walk you back to the dorm, he said, just in case. You look kind of shaky. She didn't argue as he took her arm, and they started back along the path. It was growing quite dark by now, and Alessia had no moon. Han could barely make out the path ahead, but 921 produced her goggles from the pocket of her robe and put them on. These are like night vision goggles. She led the way, but he kept hold of her arm to steady her. So do you ever miss Corellia? He asked. No, she said, but he could tell it was a lie. Do you? I don't miss the people, but I miss the planet, Han said, honestly. Corellia's a nice place. I always wanted to go to the ocean, but never got the chance. You ever been to the ocean? Yes, she said slowly, as if his question brought back memories she'd rather not think about. You got a family there? Yes. She hesitated, then added, At least, I think so. I haven't talked with them in almost a year. Is that how long you've been here? Han asked. Yes. They picked their way through the hot, wet darkness in silence. Han was very conscious of holding her arm beneath the wide sleeve of her robe. Her bones were too close to the skin, but her flesh itself was warm and soft and very female. So you planning to stay here for good? Han asked as a small clot of shambling pilgrims passed them in the darkness. Or is this just kind of temporary? Temporary? He could barely see the light blur of her face with the dark line of the goggles running across it as she turned toward him. How could it be temporary? I want to serve the One, be part of the All forever. Oh, Han said. Well, what about stuff like, falling in love, traveling, maybe settling down someday and having kids? We give up those kinds of attachments when we become part of the All, she said, but there was a hint of regret in her voice. Too bad, he said. Without warning, it began to rain steadily. Han could feel 921 shiver slightly despite the warmth. He pulled a rain poncho out of his pocket and spread it over both of their heads. They walked along, huddled beneath it, bodies touching. Han was conscious of Murg following at a discreet distance. Poor guy, he hates to get wet. The pilot raised his voice to be heard over the spatter of the rain. I can't just go on calling you 921. If we're going to be friends, you got to tell me your name. Who says we're going to be friends? She asked. I just know it, Han told her. He grinned, knowing she could see him in the darkness. I'm irresistible when I put my mind to it. You're conceited, that's what you are, she said, sounding half vexed, half amused. Conceited, cocky, arrogant, insufferable. She broke off, chuckling. Han realized it was the first time he'd heard her laugh. Oh, go on, please, the pilot mock protested, laughing himself. I love it when women compliment me. Music to my ears. He was delighted to hear her sound so alive. I'm tired, she said, her momentary good humor vanishing like morning mist. And here we are at the doors. Thanks for walking me back, Pilot Drago. There was a faint circle of light emanating from the windows in the dormitory, and Han stopped them right on the edge of it, so he could see her, but they wouldn't be fully illuminated to any onlooker. Not Pilot, he reminded her. It's Vic. By the way, for those joining in, Han is going by the alias of Vic Drago while he's on this planet. She tried to step back away from him, but Han tightened his grip on her arm, careful to be gentle, but not letting her pull away. Vic, okay? Vic, right, she said. Now please, let me go, and don't come back, please. Hey, Madden Gods 222, how are you? Oh, hey, cool. I get to use the mod hammer now. Where is the... No, not that. There we go. Well, that's neat. That's the first time I've had to do that. Alright, let's see. Where were we before that happened? Now please let me go and don't come back. Why not? Han was hurt. Because you're not good for me. For my spiritual essence. He smiled in the hot darkness. Admit it, you like me. Where'd we go? No, I don't. Yes, you do. Admit it. He stepped closer to her, looking down into her face. She was tall, only half a head shorter than he was. Gently, Han reached up to push the concealing goggles up off her eyes. Nice, Movikin. His fingers lingered on her cheek as he did it. There, he said softly. That's better. It's wrong. Totally wrong to cover this face, these eyes. You're being blasphemous, she said, sounding breathless, but she didn't jerk away. No, I'm not, he said. Tell me your name. She shook her head miserably, and her eyes were haunted. Vic, I can't. All right, I can wait, Han thought. But I'll see you again, right? She hesitated for so long that he found himself holding his breath. Then she ducked her head, mumbled, yes, and pulled away. This time Han let her go. 921 ran away into the dormitory without looking back. Excuse me. Han leaned forward in the pilot seat, glancing at the figures rolling by on the screen of the nav computer. Ready to enter real space at rendezvous coordinates, he said aloud. 3, 2, 1. He pulled back the lever, and the stars around the Elysian Dream suddenly elongated into thin streaks of light, all reaching toward a central point, a point toward which the ship plunged. The engines roared, then throttled down, and then with a suddenness that took some getting used to, they were back in real space. Right on course, Merg. This is him talking, Merg. Right on course, Merg, Han said triumphantly. I'm getting this interstellar flying stuff down pat lately, ain't I? Aren't, the Togorian corrected. I have been reading book Pilot gave Mer. He stopped himself. Me. And ain't is not correct way to talk basic. Remind me to teach you about articles sometime, Han muttered. Don't I even get a gold star for bringing us to the rendezvous right on the money? Much better than first time, Merc commented, referring to the first interstellar trip 3 weeks ago. Han had made a tiny error in programming the Navicomputer on exactly where to bring them out of hyperspace, and the dream had wound up 3 parsecs from where they were supposed to emerge. Han had to make an extra hyperspace jump to bring them into the correct position. Hey, Han protested. That was just my first time, and it wasn't my fault the screen is so old that an 8 looked like a 6. Pilot has done better since then, Merc acknowledged. Second and third trips went okay. You bet they did, Han muttered. I'm good, Merc. I really am. I'll bet that I can almost pass the exams to get into the Imperial Academy now. A few more months practice and I'll really be set. Merc will miss... The Togorian paused. Correction. I will miss Pilot when he goes. I'll miss you too, pal, Han said, meaning it. But don't worry, we can... The Alessian dream shuddered violently as a loud whang reverberated through their hull. What the... Han pushed buttons, turning on the rear view screen. Merc, something hit us. Asteroid? The Togorian suggested. Whang! Nope, Han yelled, staring incredulously at the view screen. 2 ships, they gotta be pirates. Get to the gunner's well. As he stared at the screen, the rightmost vessel launched another shot. Brace yourself! Merg, who had unstrapped himself and gotten up to head to the gunner's mount, yowled as another shot whanged against the hull, sending him back into his seat with bruising force. Cursing, Han yanked the dream hard to port. Who were these guys? Pirates usually fired warning shots and demanded that the attacked vessel surrender. Their goal was to steal the cargo, commandeer the ship, and keep the crew alive so they could be sold as slaves. Destroying or crippling the ship and killing the crew wasn't cost-effective. Merg, get below. They're going to blast us into atoms. We lost a shield. As the Togorian propelled himself out of the co-pilot seat and lurched out of the control room, 2 more shots grazed the Alessian dream. They're aiming at the hyperdrive engines. They're out to cripple us. Han sent the ship into a desperate roll, flipping her up on her side just in time to avoid another blast that nearly singed the underside and would have blown out the Quadix power core. He put on a burst of speed, trying to get far enough ahead of the pursuing pirates to double back and shoot at them. He had little confidence in Merg's ability to actually hit anything while manning the gunwale. The Togorian was quick and able, but he'd never actually shot at a live, much less moving target. As he sent the ship hurtling recklessly along, straining her speed to the utmost, Han flipped open the communications channel. He had to let someone know what was happening in case the dream was crippled and they got a chance to get to a life pod. Alessia Colony 1, this is Alessian Dream. Colony 1, this is the Dream. We're under attack. Repeat, attack. 2 vessels jumped us right just after we emerged from hyperspace. Han's voice cracked from the strain. Honest, it wasn't my fault. They're chasing us. I'm not even... and I'm taking evasive maneuvers. Pilot Drago out. He glanced at the view screen with the sensor readouts below, saw that they'd gained on their pursuers. He still hadn't gotten a good look at the pirate ships, and then sent the dream spiraling down beneath the oncoming ships. As they whooshed by overhead, he flipped his vessel up into a tight turn. Merg now! He yelled into the intercom. A Togorian roar and a splat of energy rewarded his command, but Merg missed his quarry completely. One of the pirates had turned and was firing again. Wham! The Alessian dream shook violently as the ship sustained a major hit. Han's stomach lurched as he heard a yowl of sheer agony float up from the gunwale. Merg? Merg, are you hit? He yelled, but there was no answer. A quick status check told him that they'd suffered a tiny drop in pressure, but that the leak had been automatically sealed by the ship's systems. All right, you creeps, Han muttered, homing in with his Araka concussion missiles, centering the rightmost pirate in his cross sights. Take that! The dream lurched violently as the missile shot away. Han grimaced as the pirate managed to evade it at the last second. He tried again, if he could just get him moving more to his port side. Yes, Han muttered savagely as he launched another missile right into the path of the pirate, anticipating his evasive maneuver. Gotcha. A second later, a bright yellow-white light splashed out in all directions, expanding into a fireball of incandescent beauty. Han had to look away, and when he looked back, the other pirate was hightailing it the opposite direction at full throttle. No, you don't, Han growled. I'll get you too. With a fierce stab of his finger, he tracked and launched again. The concussion missile followed its target, but then the pirate ship vanished in a burst of striated light. They had jumped into hyperspace in safety. Han cursed under his breath as he put the Dream on autopilot and bolted for the gunwell. Was Murg okay? Seconds later, Han was standing in the ruins of the gun mount, seeing the pressure sealant that the Dream's system had automatically triggered to squirt out and mend the pressure leak. There was a strong ozone smell and scorch marks where the blast had hit them. Murg was still strapped into the movable seat, but the Togorian was slumped unconscious, and he didn't stir as Han unstrapped him and managed to half carry, half drag him up the ladder to the control room. The Togorian was breathing, but there was a burn mark along one side of his head, just below his right ear. Han looked further, running his fingers through the black fur, and discovered a swelling lump just back of the ear. The Togorian had obviously taken a nasty blow to the head. Han wasn't sure what to do. He knew first aid for humans and a few species of aliens, but Murg's people were rare in the galaxy. Gotta get him to a medical facility, he thought, covering the unconscious alien with a blanket and going forward to check his Navicomputer. Where's the nearest system? Han scanned star charts, then his fingers stabbed down. Okay, he whispered, here we go. He glanced over at the Togorian. Hang on, Murg. Han programmed the ship for the short hyperspace hop, then, before giving the command, went to check the engines. The nose-wrinkling smell of a burned connection made him grimace. Wonder whether I should use the backup hyperdrive unit instead. But the backup was much slower, and he had no way of knowing how serious Murg's condition was. Han decided to chance using the main hyperdrive engine. He held his breath as he initiated the jump to hyperspace. From the way the ship hesitated and the laboring sound of the engine, he started to sweat. The Dream strained, shuddered, but the stars suddenly blazed at him in streaks, and they jumped. Han came out of hyperspace a short time later, thanking his lucky stars that the Elysian Dream had held together for that hop. The ship's lightspeed engines definitely needed repairs. The Corellian headed into the star system he'd chosen, toward the sole inhabited world. While he was still fairly far out, he placed the Dream on autopilot and went back to check the box of Glitterstim. The world he'd chosen was known to have customs and spice checks, so he opened up the secret compartment the priest had built into the cargo deck and removed the boxes of Duranian ambergris, perfume that he carried as a cover cargo. Grunting with effort, Han lugged the heavy containers of perfume into the cargo bay and put them down. Then he placed the much smaller container of Glitterstim vials in the concealed compartment, making sure it sealed shut. Unless someone knew it was there, he'd never spot it. The hatch was designed to be scanner-proof. By the time Han returned to his pilot's seat, the world he'd chosen was growing in his view screen. As he approached, he saw it was a lovely world, hanging blue and white and tan against the night blackness of space. As he swooped toward it, Han suddenly remembered that he'd shut down his communication system after sending off the message to Alessia. Better turn it back on, he thought. Check in with Spaceport Authority and get cleared to land. He glanced back at Murg, who hadn't stirred or made a sound, and arranged for transport to the nearest hospital. As his fingers clicked on the comm unit, the vid screen filled with an image of a kindly-looking man with a little dark-haired girl sitting on his lap. Han was startled, then realized that this message was pre-recorded and played to every ship on an approach vector. A voiceover identified the man, His Majesty Bail Prestor Organa, Viceroy and First Chairman. The man smiled into the screen. Greetings, on behalf of myself and my people, I bid you welcome to Alderaan. Chapter 6, Alderaan and Back Again. Han listened with half his attention as the man, King somebody or other, did they say, continued with the vid message. As many of our visitors are already aware, Alderaan is a peaceful world, a world where we have eschewed weapons and their use. While you are our guest, we ask that you respect our traditions and our laws by leaving your weapons with the Port Authority during your stay here. You will find that Alderaan has much to offer a visitor. We have almost no crime. Right, Han thought. I'll just bet. And no pollution. Our lakes are clear, our air is pure, and our people are happy. We have wonderful museums, and when we invite you to visit them, be sure not to miss our grass paintings as you fly over them on your landing approach. Our grass painters are among the greatest artists in the galaxy. We welcome visitors to our beautiful world, and we only ask that you come in peace and that you obey our... With a muttered curse, Han leaned over and snapped the audio portion of the broadcast off. He made a rude gesture at the screen. A whole planet full of honest citizens? I'll believe it when I see it. Minutes later, Bail Organa's canned message was replaced by a live traffic controller from the Port Authority. Han snapped the audio back on. "Captain Drago piloting the Elysian Dream," he said crisply. "Request permission to land. I was attacked by pirates, my ship is damaged, and I've got an injured gunner. Can you arrange for Medlift to meet my ship as soon as I land?" "Certainly, Captain Drago. I have assigned you a priority approach vector. We're slotting you in at Docking Bay 422. Just follow the landing beacon to your site. We'll have a transport and Medroid standing by." "Thanks." Han's approach vector did indeed take him over the grass paintings, and, distracted as he was, he couldn't help but be impressed. The huge plain of wind-blown, flowing grass boasted a kilometers-wide abstract design picked out in multicolored wildflowers. Neat trick, he thought. Wonder how they do it, and why they bother. It's not like you could sell art like that and make money off it. The capital city of Alderaan, Aldera, was located on an island in the middle of a lake. The site of the lake was actually a meteor crater that had filled with water from underground springs. The remains of the huge, relatively recent, in geological terms at least, crater surrounded the lake in a series of low, jagged foothills whose sides were splashed with green fields and forests. The water filling the millennia-old crater sparkled brilliant ice blue in the early morning rays of the sun. The spaceport was on the far side of the island, and Han swooped low over the city on his assigned approach vector. In just minutes, he was bringing the Elysian Dream down for a perfect landing. He now had so much experience landing, despite massive storms and vicious air currents, that landing a ship on a normal planet seemed like child's play. The medical unit was waiting as promised. Han quickly unbuckled Merc's blaster and stowed it away, then he brought the Medroid with the anti-grav stretcher on board, and helped load Merc onto it. "Do you think he'll be okay?" he asked the attending droid. "My preliminary scan indicates that there is no life-threatening trauma as a result of the head injury," the droid replied. "However, we will need to run further tests. I would anticipate that your crew member will require an overnight stay in our facility." "Okay," Han said. "I gotta figure out some way to pay for Merc's treatment," he thought as he watched the stretcher bearing the Togorian vanish inside the transport, which promptly lifted off and headed south. Seeing a technician going by, Han waved the woman over. "Listen, I've sustained some damage," he said. "Can I get a repair crew in here right away?" "Let me see how bad it is," she said. Han guided her into the gunner's mount, then into the engine room to check out the hyperdrive. "Both jobs will require at least 6 hours work to fix," she told him. "But we can start on it today." "Good," Han said. He had done minor swoop and speeder repairs while he was a racer, but he'd never tackled anything as big as this, and he wanted to make sure the job was done right. As the repair crew came aboard the Dream, Han wondered what he should do next. Call Alessia, he decided. The priests were going to have to arrange for payment for the repairs and Merc's treatment. Han headed for the control cabin, intending to place the call immediately. His hand was actually on the switch when he suddenly froze. "Wait a minute," he thought. "What am I doing? I'm sitting here with a globe of glitterstim, the most valuable spice of all, and I'm just going to take it back to Alessia so they can sell it again?" Han checked back in his automatic log recordings, listened to what he'd said during the transmission. He grinned to himself. "This is a piece of cake. All I have to do is tell the priest that I was boarded and the pirates took the glitterstim. Merc was out cold. He doesn't know what happened. I can sell the spice here on Alderaan, stash the money in an account here, then send for it later. They'll never know." But if he wanted to keep his job as a pilot for the Elysian priest, he'd have to make the deal fast. He'd reported himself at the rendezvous coordinates, and the priests weren't stupid. They could check on how long it would take a ship to get back from where he'd been attacked to Alderaan. He could account for a few extra hours by pointing to the damage the Dream had sustained and pleading the slowness of the journey, the need to nurse the ship along. "Okay," Han thought. "I've got about 5 hours I can fudge here, no more. By that time, I've got to call in and let them know I'm alive, that their ship is damaged, and that they have to arrange for payment. Any more time than that, they'll get suspicious." Pulling his battered brown lizard-hide jacket out of his locker, Han straightened his worn pilot's coveralls as best he could, then he combed his hair. Don't want to look scruffy, he thought, wryly, thinking of Dulana and how the Wookiee had always told him he looked good with his hair standing straight up, like one of her own people. Pulling on the jacket over the gray uniform, he stared regretfully at Merc's blaster, wishing he could strap it on. Stupid planet. Whoever heard of a world with no weapons allowed? With a sigh and a shake of his head, Han left the Elysian Dream to the repair crews. He walked quickly to the entrance to the spaceport, then caught one of the free shuttles that led into the capital city of Aldera. The metropolis glittered white in the sunshine, as clean and luxurious as a city in a dream. Han stared out the window of the shuttle, taking in the ultra-modern towers, domes, and layered buildings. Their white shapes interspersed with green terraces. The island was hilly, and the city architects had followed the natural lines of the place rather than leveling it. The result was pleasant and varied to the eye, beautiful and modern without seeming harsh or artificial. The automated shuttle's canned program indicated points of interest as they passed. Han saw museums, gigantic enclosed gallerias, office and government buildings, and finally, as they approached the heart of the city, he saw the tall, sharp spires and shallow domes of the royal palace, gleaming white and gold in the sun. Han smiled wryly, wondering if the child princess he'd seen was somewhere on those grounds living her rich, perfect life. With any luck, I'll soon be rich too. Han stayed aboard the transport as it glided along its route, and he continued scoping out the city. They are out of the big buildings now and heading through the residential suburbs. Han had to admit that it looked like a nice place to live. As he gazed at the many fountained plazas and courtyards, the affluent homes, clean streets, and well-dressed people they passed. But this isn't the area I want. I better do some exploring on my own. They don't want tourists to see the places I want to go. After the shuttle let him off, Han walked around the central part of the city, checking out the lay of the land, and instinctively he headed for an area where the houses were smaller and not as well maintained. Finally, in a neighborhood that was definitely lower income, and boasted more than one tavern and hawk shop, he realized he'd come to the right place. Han scanned the streets as he walked, looking for a particular type of individual. Finally, he spotted what he was looking for. A boy dressed in clothes that were borderline too small, ragged, and not very clean, was sauntering along the street, glancing oh so casually at each passerby. Han recognized the child, though he'd never seen him before. A pickpocket. 10 years ago, he'd been that child. Han increased the length of his strides until he caught up with the boy. As expected, the lad shifted his weight and altered stride to brush against Han as the Corellian walked past him. Also expected with the lightning-fast fingers that delved deep into the pilot's jacket pocket. The fingers came away empty. Han's ID and the few credits he was carrying were sealed inside the inside pocket of his coverall. Han lengthened his strides until he was ahead of the boy, then, without warning, spun on his heel and confronted the child. "Hey there," he said, smiling pleasantly and holding up the boy's ident disc and money. "Lose something?" The boy's mouth dropped open in amazement. Then he recovered himself and glared at Han, his black eyes smoldering. Han leaned casually against a storefront. "Careless of you to lose those things." The boy swelled up like a poisoned Relfa lizard, then launched into a furious and detailed description of Han's ancestry, personal habits, and probable destination. Han listened patiently until the urchin began to sputter and repeat himself. Then he waved for silence. "I'll give him back," he said genially, in exchange for some information. The boy glared sullenly, tossing his overlong hair back out of his eyes. "Kind of information, you son of a diseased pervert?" Han tossed one of the credit coins into the air, caught it effortlessly without looking. "Watch your mouth, Junior. I just want to know where in town people go to make deals." "What kind of deals?" "You know what kind of deals. Deals they don't want the law to know about. Deals for substances you can't buy legally." "Spice?" The boy frowned. "What kind?" "Glitterstim." The boy's brow creased even further. "What's that?" Just my luck, Han thought. I run into the only dumb pickpocket in Aldera. Great. "Glitterstim," Han said. It's really valuable, even more so than carcinum or andrus." The boy shook his head again. "Never heard of them either." "I don't believe this. What about andrus? You got andrus here? Used to flavor food, preserve it?" The kid nodded. "Yeah, andrus, we got that. Expensive stuff." "Right," Han said. "When you buy andrus, who do you buy it from?" "I don't buy it, creep," the boy said. "Now give me back my money and ID." "Just a second, be patient," Han said, holding the items up safely out of the boy's reach. "So, okay, you don't buy andrus personally. But if you or your friends wanted some, how would they get it? Buy it in a store or a government agency? The boy's expression was eloquent as he shook his head. No, man, we'd buy it from Derek Lill. At last, a name. That's what I wanted. Derek Lill, what's he look like? Taller than you, long hair, beard, fat around his middle? Old or young? Old. Gray hair. Where does he hang out? Han asked. Do I look like his keeper? The pickpocket demanded scornfully. Han took a deep breath. Just tell me the names of any places where he might go on a typical day. Don't lie or I'll swear out a complaint that... Excuse me. Or I'll swear out a complaint that you tried to rob me. The boy named 6 taverns, telling Han that they were all within a 5-minute walk. Han straightened up, flipped the boy his ID and money. Next time, keep it inside your clothes, Junior, he said, next to your skin. He patted his own money and gave the lad a smug smile. The lad snarled at Han and walked away, cursing. Alderaanian taverns were much too clean and well lit, Han decided, an hour later. He had been to 3 of the 6 so far, and none of them appeared seamy enough for his purposes. No sign of Derek Lill either. At one place he'd glimpsed a man in the back slide something to another under cover of his arm, and then receive a credit disc slipped to him just as clandestinely. Han had waited until the first man had gotten up to use the refresher unit, then he followed him. When the man came out, Han was waiting for him in the dim hallway. Like a word with you, pal, he said. The dealer, a small, sharp-faced man who reminded Han of a Rannet, eyed the Corellian suspiciously, then evidently decided Han offered no threat. Yeah, what about? You dealin' spice? The man hesitated for a long moment. How much you want? No, pal, I'm sellin', not buyin'. You interested? What do you got? Glitterstim, 100 vials. Glitterstim? The man's voice scaled up, then he hastily lowered it and stepped closer. Where'd you get that, son? I'm not your son, and it's none of your business where I got it. You interested? On any other world than this one, I better believe I'd be interested, but... The man shook his head. No channels to unload it. I'd have to try and smuggle it off-world, and that's too risky. They'd send me to the mines on Kessel to dig out the infernal stuff. Glitterstim can be dangerous, you know. Make you blind if you take too much. Drives Biths mad, you know. I know all that, Han said impatiently. Thanks for nothing, pal. Scowling, he stalked out of the tavern. He finally ran down Derek Lill in the 5th tavern he visited. Han recognized the man from the pickpocket's description. Lill was playing Sabak, and when he saw Han standing there, watching the game, he cordially waved the young Corellian over. Care to sit in for a hand? Han had played Sabak before, but that wasn't what he came here for. He stared directly at Derek Lill and raised his eyebrows. All depends on what you'll accept for a stake, Lill. The man's expression didn't change a whit as he glanced casually up. You got something good, pilot? Might. Well, the ante is 20 credits. Han shook his head. Changed my mind, going out to get some fresh air. He stood outside, leaning against the alley wall for about 5 minutes, when he heard someone approaching. Han said without looking, Took you long enough. Must have been winning. Idiot's array, Lill said, using the Sabak player's term for a top-notch winning hand. So what have you got? Han turned to look at the man. Glitterstim, 100 vials. Whoo! Dark Lill whistled in amazement. Where'd you come by that? None of your business, Han said. Want it? Give you a good price. Wish I could, young fellow, wish I could, Lill said, sounding regretful. But I'd be a fool to take it. Just no market here on Alderaan. Han cursed under his breath and turned away. What am I going to do? He wondered. His time was definitely running out. Maybe he should hop an intercontinental shuttle to some other city. Maybe it was only Alderaan that was so preternaturally clean on this world. Han sighed. I don't have time. I either sell the stuff in an hour, or I... A hand fell on his shoulder. It took every bit of his self-control not to yell and bolt. He was so keyed up. Instead, he just turned and glared at the middle-aged, dark-skinned man who'd fallen into step with him. I think you've mistaken me for someone else, he said evenly. I don't think so, Vic, the man said. Pilot Vic Drago out of Alesia, right? So what? Han said. I don't know you. Marsden Latham, the man said, flashing a hollow ID badge under Han's nose. Alderanian Internal Security Force. Oh no. We've been keeping an eye on you, Pilot Drago, ever since you limped in here this morning. We're happy we can help you out with repairs and fix up your partner. You saw that message when you first came within frequency range of Alderaan. I saw it. Well, it's meant to be taken seriously. We don't like trouble here. The man smiled suddenly, showing very even, very white teeth. You wouldn't be out to cause us any trouble, would you, Pilot? Han strove to keep his face impassive. They know that I've been trying to cut a deal. Must have been watching me all morning. Silently, he cursed the official. Aloud, he said, "Course not, sir. I'm a peace-loving kind of guy." I told my chief that, and I'm glad to have my impression confirmed. Nice talking to you, Pilot Drago. Enjoy your stay on Alderaan. The man's strides came faster and longer then, and he walked away from Han up the street. The Corellian forced himself to keep walking slowly, forced himself not to glance behind him. They were there, no doubt, shadowing him. The game was over and he was busted. Scowling, Han shook his head, half in disgust, half in admiration. The security operatives must be good. He'd had no idea they'd been tailing him. Obviously, the man's talk had been a not-so-veiled warning to stop trying to sell his cargo. He'd have to take it back to Alesia. There weren't any other planets close enough to reach so he could make the sale. He checked the time, discovering he just had time to get out to check on Merg before he'd have to call back to Alesia. Han's strides came faster as he headed for the nearest public transport station. The university medical facility where the Togorian had been taken was attached to the University of Alderaan campus. Han swung down from the repulsor lift public transport and stood looking around for a moment. Nice, he thought. Real nice. For a moment he wondered if the academy would look anything like this. Probably not, he concluded. It's a military establishment. It'll look more like a base, I'll bet. But this is real classy. Green and blue lawns stretched across the central quadrangle. Flower beds made bright splashes of color and surrounded the huge central fountain. At the center of the fountain was a massive sculpture carved from living ice of a young Alderanian man and woman standing with linked hands reaching for the skies. Hey, that's got to be worth a barrel of credits, Han thought, eyeing the sculpture and realizing it must be a priceless work of art. Definitely a classy joint. Han decided as he walked past the huge fountain and continued up the impressive white stone stairs to the medical facility. The info droid at the front desk gave him the number of the Togorian's room. Han hurried down the corridors, then outside, paused to speak to the medical droid. Your friend sustained a severe blow to the cranium, the droid said. It would probably have killed a humanoid. Fortunately, Togorians have very dense bone matter, and so he is relatively uninjured. We have been quick healing him since he came here, and he should be ready to leave by tomorrow morning. Thanks, Han said, opening the door and going in. Merg lay curled on a large round pallet. The Togorian was covered with tiny sensor units that reported on his condition. on his condition. As Han entered, the blue eyes opened. Merg raised himself partly up. Pilot! Hey, how you doing, pal? Han was surprised to feel a huge wash of relief when he saw the Togorian conscious and lucid again. He hadn't realized he'd gotten so fond of the big felinoid. They treating you all right? Pilot! Merg seemed utterly amazed to find Han here. You look surprised to see me, Han said. That was a huge understatement. Merg didn't look surprised, he looked flabbergasted. Merg is... The big alien shook his furry head a little dizzily. I mean, I never thought I would see you again. Han drew himself up. Why not? Did you think I'd just dump you here and swipe the cargo? Yes, replied Merg simply. Well, I'm here, ain't I? If it wasn't for me hauling us into Alderaanian space by the skin of our noses, you'd be dead meat by now. I suggest you remember that, pal. You owe me. Merg nodded dazedly. Yes, pilot, I owe you. Han scowled at him and sat down on the edge of the pallet. And skip that pilot formality. I'm Vic from now on, okay? Merg put out a paw, laid it gently over Han's arm, the huge clawed fingers with their narrow retracted claws dwarfing the human's limb. Okay, Vic. After Han left Merg to the tender ministrations of the medical droids, he went back to the dream and called Alesia. Teroenza was not available, so he asked to speak to Veritil. When the Alessian's horned, bloated visage appeared on the screen, Han gave him an abbreviated account of their adventures, promising to start back to Elysia the following day. Veritil, in his turn, promised to arrange payment for the ship's repairs and Merc's treatment. When he had finished his call, Han found that he was hungry, so after checking his small hoard of credits, he headed over to a combination tavern and eatery on the campus of the University of Alderaan. It was set into a secluded courtyard, and a rainbow-colored fountain sent showers of crystal drops into the air before the entrance. Han pulled the door open and went in. The tavern was filled with fashionably dressed young people, talking, laughing, drinking, and eating. Han hesitated, feeling suddenly self-conscious, but his natural bravado came to his rescue. "I'm just as good as they are," he thought defiantly, following the server droid to a small table. Despite his brave front, the young Corellian was uncomfortably conscious of the way his sweat-stained coverall and battered jacket contrasted with the elegant, trendy garb of the students who chattered and laughed at the tables. Once seated, Han ordered an Alderaanian ale. Studying the menu, he noticed that the place featured Nerf cubes and tubers and wine sauce for a special. It was a little pricey, but he ordered it anyway, knowing that Nerf was said to be a delicacy. The stew came with a plate of flatbread, which made him think of Pilgrim 921. Wish she were here, he thought. It'd be nice to have someone to talk to. Dipping a square of flatbread into the dish, he tasted, chewed, then smiled. This is really good. It had been a long, long time since he'd had really good food. Denizens of the Trader's Luck frequently existed on space rations during their voyages. The only times Han had really eaten well was when he'd been playing his part in one of Garrus Shrike's scams. He remembered one barbecue he'd gone to on Corellia. Tralladon ribs with special sauce. But even barbecued Tralladon ribs couldn't equal Nerf, he decided. Hungrily, Han dug into his meal. When he was about halfway through, a pretty girl with long, curly chestnut hair and bright blue eyes walked up onto the tiny stage, carrying a mandovial. Seating herself on a stool, she began to strum it, then a moment later her voice rang out, clear and true, in what was evidently a traditional Alderaanian ballad. It was the usual stuff about a girl who had lost her lover to the lure of the space lanes, and how she waited but he never came home, but the singer's voice was so pure, so unaffected, that she lent the cliched words true emotion and dignity. When she'd finished, Han, along with the other patrons, clapped enthusiastically. The girl sang another song, then stepped down off the stage and walked straight toward Han. For a moment he thought, or hoped, that she was coming over to sit with him, but no such luck. She slid into a seat at the next table. Since the tavern was evidently a popular hangout, the tables were crowded close together. The girl wound up sitting within arm's length of Han. The other person at the table was a round-faced young man, a year or two older than the pilot, probably her boyfriend, Han thought, covertly eyeing the young man. He had light brown hair and pale hazel green eyes. Unlike the girl, who wore a simple ankle-length blue dress and sandals, her escort was a tribute to modern fashion. His purple tunic was belted with a wide orange belt that clashed with his knee-high red boots. His yellow breeches clung to his legs like a second skin. Han, in his worn gray coverall, felt like a house warbler next to a paradise bird. As the singer shook back her hair and smiled triumphantly, Han managed to catch her eye. He mimed clapping, and she grinned and bowed. "You were great," he told her. "Thank you," she said. "That was the first time I've gotten up my nerve to sing in front of a crowd." The girl was flushed, breathless, and very charming. Han smiled back at her. I wouldn't mind spending the evening and the night with her. Aloud, he said, "We're a very lucky audience, then, witnessing the beginning of a great career." "Thank you," she held out her hand. "I'm Aaron Dro, and this is Born Thul." Han took her hand, and instead of shaking it, bowed over it as though she were Corellian nobility. His lips didn't touch the back of her hand, but he came close enough she could feel the warmth of his breath on her skin. "I'm honored, Aaron," he said, "Vic Drago." When he released her hand and turned to greet her escort, Han could tell the young man was irked, and making no effort to hide it. "Greetings," Han said, since he wasn't sure what honorific, if any, was proper on Alderaan. "Greetings," Thul said. Aaron, you are magnificent. Would you care to go somewhere else to celebrate your triumph? Can't stand competition, Han thought, smothering a mischievous grin. He, too, had seen Aaron's blue eyes light up when he'd introduced himself. Listen, I won't intrude, he said, flashing his most charming smile at the singer. I just had to tell you how much I enjoyed your singing, but I won't take up any more of your time. Thul looked as though he'd have liked to say good, but didn't quite dare. Aaron shook her head and put a reassuring hand on Han's arm. Oh no, of course you're not intruding, Vic. She eyed his coverall. I was going to ask if you went to school here, but you don't, do you? Han shook his head. Nah, I'm only here for tonight. Flew in this morning for repairs, got in a fight with some pirates and damaged my ship. The wide blue eyes grew even wider. Flew? Pirates? Are you a star pilot? Han shrugged modestly. Yeah. Bornin Thul was getting hot under the collar, the Corellian noted. Doesn't like the idea of his girl talking to a working-class guy like me. Stuck-up so-and-so. Well, tough, Brother Bornin. Oh my, Aaron breathed. That's so exciting. Real pirates? What happened? Han shrugged again. Came out of hyperspace and they were on me quicker than stink on a skeeg. 2 of them, blasted 1, but between them they damaged my hyperdrive, so I came on to Alderaan for repairs. You blasted 1? Bornin demanded sharply, raising a skeptical eyebrow. With what? With an Arakid missile, pal, Han said evenly, and blew his butt in tiny little pieces. Aaron shivered, half with excitement, half with distress. That sounds really scary. Han took a swallow of ale. All in a day's work, he said, deliberately laconic. By this time, Bornin had had just about enough. His face reddened and he grabbed Aaron's arm. Sweetheart, let's go. I'm taking you out to the best place in town, if you'll excuse us, Pilot Drago. Girl hesitated for a long moment. I could get her, Han thought. I know I could. That'd really stick in this upper-class jerk's craw, too, to have me walk out of here with his girl. For a moment, Han was tempted, then he made himself relax and relinquish the contest. He sensed that Aaron was a really nice girl, someone who didn't deserve to be treated like a gaming piece, so he could score points off her snotty boyfriend. One of the reasons he found her attractive, Han realized, was that she reminded him a little of 921, with her wide blue eyes and sweet smile. Besides, he thought, those security guys are probably still tailing me. Old Bornin here might just be man enough to pick a fight, and if they're still around, that could get messy. So, Han stood, respectfully, and gave Aaron a formal bow. Been a real pleasure, he said. Enjoy your celebration. Thank you, she said, and gave him a last quick smile before she allowed Bornin to lead her out. Han sat back down to his cooling food, reflecting that this incident had reminded him of just how much he detested stuck-up rich people. He'd encountered lots of them on Corellia while working Shrike scams, and the fact that most of them weren't worth a blaster bolt to blow them to atoms was the only thing that made him able to act his part during the swindles. By the time Han returned to the Elysian Dream, and the tiny bunk that had been installed in part of the cargo area for him, he was slightly the worse for the Alderaanian ale. Thoughts of 921 kept running through his mind, and he cursed aloud in the silence, wishing he could stop thinking about her. Han had never before encountered a woman that he'd spent time thinking about when she wasn't with him. The knowledge that 921 had wormed her way that deep into his mind unsettled Han, made him uncomfortable. She's just a girl, Solo. You don't even know her blasted name. Quit mooning on like this. You going soft in the head or something? Han flung himself down on his bunk and groaned aloud, remembering the events of the day. What a world, he thought muzzily. So goody-goody that a guy can't even sell a perfectly good cargo of spice. The trip back to Alesia was uneventful. Han piloted the Dream down through the clouds without a single mishap, and hardly even shook the ship as he did it. Excuse me. Even Murg, who was still nursing a headache, couldn't complain. It was becoming second nature to Han to see, analyze, and avoid the paths of the planet's massive storm systems. The moment the ship was down on the landing pad, Han's communicator came to life, summoning him to meet with Teroenza immediately. Han had been expecting this. He sent Merc off to the infirmary to get some treatment for his headache and walked up to the administration building alone. This time he was met by Gunnar Toss and escorted into the High Priest's inner sanctum, where he'd been before. Teroenzo was resting in a most unusual piece of furniture, a sort of sling or hammock that allowed the High Priest to lean back on his massive haunches and take his weight off his back legs. His thick forelegs were supported by a movable padded leg rest that could swing in and out to allow him to get into the contraption. The minute the High Priest saw Han, his expression, which Han was beginning to be able to read, turned positively benevolent. "Pilot Drago," he boomed. "I understand you're a hero. Your bravery and courage are beyond price, but I have ordered a bonus to be placed in your account." Han blinked, then smiled. "Thanks, sir." "We've lost 2 ships that failed to return from their rendezvous points over the past year and a half," Teroenzo continued. "You were the first pilot to get a look at your attackers and return to tell us who they were. What did you see?" Han shrugged. "Well, it all happened real fast, and I was kind of busy, sir. But I'm pretty sure that ship I destroyed was a Drell-built ship. Looked like it. The chisel-shaped prow and stubby stern are pretty distinctive." "Did they communicate with you? Give you a chance to surrender before attacking?" "Nope, they shot first and just kept on shooting. They were trying to destroy the Dream, because if they had... or they weren't trying to destroy the Dream, because if they had, they'd have done it." Oh, man, sorry. But they had no interest in the ship, which was strange. Most pirates would try to disable the ship enough to take it, while leaving it easy to repair so they could use it or sell it. These guys were out to cripple the Dream and kill me and Merg. "How did they attack?" "From behind. They could have nailed us before we even knew they were there. They had at least 2 clear shots, and the shielding on the Dream isn't that good." As he remembered the battle, Han took a deep breath. "I think we need to strengthen the shielding, sir." "I'll order that to be done, pilot," Teroenzo agreed. The huge Tolanda Till folded his tiny arms, and his massive forehead wrinkled as he considered what Han had told him. "Interesting that they attack first without engaging a tractor beam and attempting to gain your surrender." "Yeah, that's what I thought." Han had known several traders aboard the Luck that had spent time on pirate crews, and had listened to them bragging about their adventures. A straight-out attack wasn't the usual pirate style. It would have been more typical for a deep space pirate to fire a warning shot, then, after the pilot had surrendered, board the ship. "It's funny, it's like they planned to disable the Dream, probably killing me and Merg in the process, and then board her while she was dead in space." "No communication or demand for surrender at all?" "None," Han affirmed. Teroenzo smoothed the loose folds of flesh. "Oh, hi, Jane." "One second. I have a kitty. Say hi." There you go. Let's see. "Almost as though they were willing to risk destroying the Dream and her cargo rather than communicate with you." "Yeah, I'd say so." "How close were you to the rendezvous point when you were attacked?" "We'd come out of hyperspace less than 5 minutes before. No doubt, sir, they were waiting for us. They knew we were coming." "Had you made any transmissions referring to your course or coordinates, Pilot Drago?" "No, sir. As instructed, I maintained strict silence on all frequencies." Teroenzo rumbled thoughtfully, deep in his chest, then nodded his massive, horned head. "Again, I commend your bravery. How is Merg?" "He'll be okay. Took a hard blow to the head, though." "I will want to speak to him when he is well enough." "Very well, pilot. You are dismissed." Han stood his ground. "Sir, I'd like to ask a favor." "Yes?" "My blaster was taken from me when I arrived on Alessia. I'd like it returned. If there's any chance I might be boarded by pirates sometime in the future, I want to be able to shoot back." Teroenzo considered for a moment, then nodded agreement. "I will order your weapon returned to you, pilot. You have certainly demonstrated your loyalty and earned our trust by your actions these last few days." The huge being waved a small hand. "Tell me, Pilot Drago, did it never occur to you to attempt to sell your cargo and tell us it had been stolen by the pirates?" Han shook his head. "No, sir, it didn't," he said earnestly. "Very good. Impressed. Terenz's wide, lipless mouth curved up in what was evidently meant as a smile of approval. Most impressed. Han walked out of the administration building, thankful that he'd been able to lie convincingly since he was 7. He was especially proud of his ability to fabricate on a moment's notice. His footsteps took him down the path toward the infirmary, time to check up on Murg, see how the Togorian was doing. Also, it was time to meet Jalis Nebel, the Celestin pilot who'd been placed on sick leave. Han had a few questions to ask the Celestin. Chapter 7, Bria. But it is about 1:15 a.m. here. We've been going for about 3 hours, so I think I'm going to stop reading now, and we can just chat for a little bit about how the story's going so far, what you guys think. And then next Thursday we'll pick up with Chapter 7, which is Bria. Which I won't give any spoilers there, but it's the name of a person. So, what do you guys think? How are you enjoying the story so far? Any thoughts? Or is everybody currently lurking? Turn the music up a little bit. Let's also take a look at who's on, see who we can send a raid to here. Also, while we're talking, just if you would like to check out Discord. Actually, it just posted that, it looks like. But you can check me out on Twitter, right there. I also have a Ko-fi, however you say it. If you'd like to support me there in the channel, you can also go to that URL if you ever want to donate or check out some merch that I have. I've got some cool stuff like a coffee mug, hoodie, t-shirt, pillow, a couple other things. So you can check stuff out there. But yeah, definitely if you want to know more about what's going to happen in the stream, schedule updates, things like that, definitely follow me on Twitter. It's just RAVYN_V on Twitter. If I'm going to do anything different or postpone a stream or anything like that, I typically will do that on Twitter first. And then I definitely recommend Discord. Right there.
Do it.
So it's just cavediscord.com. It's a great community there. It's kind of what I've been trying to build here as well. Some really great, accepting, supportive people on there. We talk about all kinds of different games and tabletop stuff. So yeah, good group of folks over there. So feel free to join us over there. And then we'll be doing more of the Paradise Snare next Thursday. And we'll be doing a different coffee next week. I've got ordered and it's on its way. It's called, the blend is called Indulge, and I'm drawing a blank on the company name that makes it. But it's super cute. It has a little cat on the front of it. But I'll have a picture of that and the information on that next week. But so we'll be doing a different coffee blend. And then if you guys want to come back tomorrow, about 10 p.m. Mountain Time, we'll be doing our FPS Fridays, which will be more Fallout 4. So that'll be tomorrow about 10 p.m. Yeah, so it looks like we've got looks like Madame Gandalf's still streaming, so we can go poke over there and and say hi. But before we do that, once again, I wanted to open things up and say, do you guys have any thoughts about the book, the story so far? Are you enjoying the origin story for Han Solo? Any theories on anything? And if not, that's okay too. Well, with that, we will go ahead and head over. I'm just going to pop over here. Real quick before we hit go on this. Alright. So yeah, again, we'll catch you guys again tomorrow around 10 p.m. Mountain Time for Fallout 4. Saturday there actually won't be a stream like there usually is because I will be at a convention, but Sunday we'll do what we normally do on Saturdays, which is my tabletop RPG called Badlands. So yeah, we'll see you guys tomorrow, 10 o'clock Mountain Time, and until then, you guys have a good evening.
So, I have 10 minutes before I have to go and help Gandad for sure. Raven coming in with that raid!
Gandalf!